The protagonist of this manhwa is dragged into hell by a powerful demon lord. Surprisingly, what bothers him most isn't the horrors of the underworld but the demon lord's total disregard for the idea of consent. Before this happened, the protagonist was just a regular middle schooler living an ordinary life. But one day, while walking, he tripped and somehow, his soul was torn from his body. He could only watch in fear as he sank deeper and deeper into a dark abyss. The next thing he knew, he was in hell. Terrified, he saw monstrous creatures fighting brutal battles, tearing each other apart. The worst part? The losers were eaten by the winners. Desperate to survive, he hid and somehow went 10 days without eating. How was that even possible? Hell had no day or night cycle, just endless darkness. When hunger became unbearable, he had no choice but to eat the rotten, raw meat left behind by the monsters. It was disgusting, but it kept him alive. Over time, he adjusted to the harsh conditions. With no weapons or tools, he began fighting back against the creatures. He used rocks and anything else he could find, managing to drive the monsters away. He often cried, missing his family, especially his mother, but in those moments, he promised himself he wouldn't give up. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and months into years. Eventually, he realized he had to let go of his humanity to survive. He started from nothing and climbed his way up. The meat that once repulsed him became a treasure for survival. One day, as he was eating, a strange panel appeared before him. It showed he had reached level 3. For a moment, it all felt like some sort of cruel game. Years passed quickly. By his 7th year in hell, he had reached level 24. The monsters that once scared him were now easy to defeat. After 24 years, he managed to craft a sword from a stone taken from a fallen dragon knight. Time moved on, and in his 51st year, the protagonist achieved something incredible. He killed an elder dragon. Finally, after 79 long years, he stood before the demon lord, the one who had dragged him into this nightmare. And he remembered one thing above all: it had all happened without his consent. He effortlessly slashes through the bugs guarding the demon lord's lair, and even the gatekeeper stands no chance against the aged yet surprisingly youthful protagonist. He threatens the guard, demanding that he politely open the gate, or else his remains will be fed to the monsters of this so-called hell. However, the guard is far from cooperative and puts up a bit of a struggle, taking the situation as a personal affront to the demon lord's honor. He goes on a rampage, trash-talking as he fights, but suddenly feels something pierce through him. When he looks down, he discovers a massive hole in his chest. The protagonist, unfazed, merely remarks that this noisy guard is irritating him. Meanwhile, the floating skeleton Fireball, likely his pet, asks if he isn't worried that the demon lord will retaliate for killing his guard, and whether he really intends to take over hell. The protagonist dismisses the Fireball's concerns, stating that he has no interest in something as trivial as becoming a ruler. He explains that 80 years have passed since he was dragged into this place, and every monster he has faced has been remarkable, each with fascinating stories and reasons for their presence in hell. This is why he wants to confront the demon lord and ask why he brought him here. The Fireball finds his method of inquiry rather foolish and suggests there might have been a more polite way to approach the situation. It proposes that he should fall to his knees and beg for forgiveness. Yet the protagonist remains resolute, insisting that he will resort to violence in response to the suffering he endured, especially since he was brought here without any notion of consent. With that, he grasps his sword and charges toward the demon lord, only to suddenly find himself in a hospital. He panics, wondering if this is all a dream, especially since he hasn't dreamt of Earth in ages. Nearby, he sees children playing and realizes that, judging by his own physique, he appears quite weak and unable to move his body. He convinces himself that this must be a lucid dream. Just then, his mother opens the door. Trembling at the sight of her son awakened after 30 long years, she bursts into tears and hugs him tightly. However, the protagonist feels a wave of disdain for this dream, finding it incredibly childish. To his surprise, it turns out that he actually did slay the demon lord and became the absolute ruler of hell. When his Fireball companion asks what he plans to do next, a sudden message appears, inquiring if he wishes to return to Earth. For all those 80 years, all he had wanted was to escape this very place. Without wasting a moment, he quickly accepts the offer. Suddenly, he finds himself in the hospital, having awakened from a coma state after 30 long years. The doctor checks his eye reflexes and offers positive gestures to his mother, reassuring her that rehabilitation treatment will get her son back in shape in no time. For his mother, this is a blessing, but for the protagonist, it feels like a curse. The thought of returning to life after wasting 30 years in bed, now in such a frail state, is utterly unacceptable to him. He becomes increasingly agitated, wondering if his entire journey to hell has been nothing more than a dream. The people nearby grow scared of him as he starts to act like a psychotic patient. Overwhelmed by frustration and confusion, he threatens the doctor not to come near him. But when the doctor advances, the protagonist protagonist bites him like a wild beast, demanding to know what has happened to his body. He questions whether he has been paralyzed or poisoned, desperately hoping this is just a nightmare. In his madness, he tumbles off the bed, which only deepens his mother's worry. He reflects on the 80 years of continuous struggle he endured in hell, feeling as if all of it had been wasted. Even in his darkest moments there, he had never lost hope of escaping, and now he yearns to return. Staff members are summoned immediately, grasping both of the protagonist's arms to force him back onto the bed. As he peers through the window, he sees a massive wormhole opening up in the sky. Confused and desperate, he questions his fate, wondering if his life in hell had merely been a dream he experienced while in a coma. When he refuses to calm down, the anesthesiologist uses an injection to put him to sleep. When his senses return, he finds himself watching a news channel on the TV, which confirms his suspicions. The site he had seen was indeed a gate, and a hunting team has been dispatched to clean up the monsters. The leader of the team sends reports to a man who has come to see him. The man appears shocked and overjoyed to find the protagonist awake. Still feeling confused, the protagonist asks who he is, only to realize in a flash of recognition that this is his friend, Chanho. Chanho informs him that he has been in this state for 10 years. He explains that a decade ago, while on his way home, the protagonist suddenly fell unconscious and collapsed, and since that moment he has been lying in this hospital bed. Upon hearing this, the protagonist feels a mix of confusion and relief. He had thought 30 years had passed. What irritates him most, however, is the realization that he spent 80 years in hell. Chanho shares that his mother has endured a great deal, working 3 jobs to cover his hospital expenses. He encourages the protagonist to take charge of his life again, revealing that he has a job opportunity lined up for him as well. As the protagonist is wheeled outside by his mother, seeking some fresh air, he feels a heavy sense of responsibility and a deep hatred for his body, which cannot even move on its own. Suddenly, 2 men appear, demanding the money his mother borrowed. She apologizes and pleads for just 1 more month, but the thugs remain unmoved. In a moment of aggression, one of the thugs slams her, threatening her with violence. Tears stream down her face as she begs them to stop humiliating her in front of her son, her voice trembling with desperation. However, the thug pays no attention to her pleas. Witnessing his mother's suffering ignites a fierce rage within the protagonist. He starts calling them bugs and hurling insults at them. When one of the gangsters grabs him by the sleeve, his mother desperately urges him to apologize, begging the thugs to let her son go by reminding them that he is just a child. The protagonist refuses to give in, adopting a hardened expression. The thug, smirking, throws him down to the ground with a forceful shove. After that, the gangster delivers a brutal beating. As the protagonist struggles to control his anger and yearns for his old body, a sudden arrival quest pops up before him in the status window. As soon as he acknowledges the quest, everything around him halts, as if time itself has come to a standstill. The conditions of the quest unfold within the status window. He is instructed to reach a specified point within an hour, with the promise of receiving an elixir of recovery upon success. Driven by determination, the protagonist contemplates whether regaining his former strength is truly possible. Spotting a red marker just 10 meters away, he attempts to stand. However, a grin spreads across his face as he begins crawling toward the target. The thought of complaining about something so trivial disgusts him. After all, he is someone who has already conquered hell. Crawling slower than an insect, centimeters stretch into meters, and the meters feel like endless kilometers. At this pace, he starts doubting his ability to reach the location in time. Yet he strives to stay composed, knowing from experience that the system never assigns impossible tasks. As the seconds slip by, he suddenly notices a loophole. Recalling the quest terms, it dawns on him that the only requirement is to reach the destination, regardless of how he manages to do so. Irritated by how obvious the solution had been all along, he uses his frail hands to reach for his wheelchair. Moving slowly but steadily, he manages to settle into it. However, only 35 seconds remain. Undeterred, he grips the wheelchair and propels himself forward. Refusing to lose hope, he pushes onward and, against all odds, reaches the location in the final second. With the quest completed, he seizes the reward and quickly consumes it. Almost instantly, a wave of relief washes over him. His pain fades, and though only a small fraction, he begins to regain a slight bit of his former physical strength. As the quest concludes, the time-stop effect dissolves. The thugs glance around in confusion, searching for the protagonist, who has seemingly vanished into thin air. Before they can begin their search, however, the police arrive, having apparently witnessed the entire incident. With no other choice, the thugs flee the scene in a hurry. Later that night, while lying in a hospital bed, the protagonist repeatedly attempts to summon the status window, but all efforts prove futile. He has no idea how it opened earlier. Desperate, he tries different commands like quests and missions, but eventually he abandons the attempt. His mind fixates on the need for new quests, fists, hoping they will help him regain his strength before the thugs reappear. Suddenly, a strange noise breaks the silence. He finds himself floating in a place known as the Pantheon. Initially dismissing it as a nonsensical dream, it quickly becomes apparent that this is no illusion. He has been summoned to fulfill some kind of task. Without hesitation, he requests another quest, and a punching bag, though more accurately, a punching monster, materializes before him. He follows the instructions and completes the task, earning a memory chip as a reward. No sooner is the quest finished than another appears, requiring him to run 10 kilometers. The quests continue to roll in, one after the other. With each completed task, he earns another reward. For 10 days straight, he pushes through, completing quest after quest, yet only manages to accomplish 55% of the overall implementation. Frustration builds as he tires of these low-level tasks. Finally, he demands a proper challenge. In response, the system grants him a new quest, to kill a crying demon. Suddenly, a bolt of thunder strikes before him, and the crying demon materializes. The protagonist recalls how close he came to death when facing this opponent in the past. A rush of excitement fills him at the chance for a rematch. The thunder-covered monster lets out a deafening growl and launches into the duel with a ferocious claw attack. The protagonist barely dodges in time, fully aware that a single strike could reduce him to smithereens. He leaps forward, aiming to strike, but the monster effortlessly swats him away, sending him crashing to the ground. Blood spills from his mouth as he struggles to stand, the humiliation of being tossed around by a crying demon gnawing at his pride. The battle drags on, with the protagonist, who should be feared, forced into a frustrating game of dodging. Eventually, his luck runs out, and the demon catches him, gripping him tightly in its claws. In that desperate moment, the protagonist recalls how he crushed the monster in their first encounter. He had nearly forgotten that he could summon a sword. Without hesitation, he calls one to his hand and slices through the demon's left claw in a swift, decisive motion. Showing no mercy, the protagonist swiftly sends the demon back to where it came from, as though it were nothing more than an insect. With the quest completed, he finds himself back in the hospital room. Morning has already arrived. He opens the window, the sound of which stirs his mother awake. Dazed, she asks who is standing beside her, only to be shocked when she sees the protagonist in front of her. His physique now resembles that of a bodybuilder. The hospital staff responsible for his rehabilitation are left speechless. According to their expectations, his recovery should have taken at least 6 months. It's beyond comprehension how the protagonist achieved such remarkable progress in just 15 days. His mother, still worried about her son, expresses her concern. The doctor gently reassures her, calming her nerves by stating there is nothing to fear. Meanwhile, the protagonist feels the effects of his quest, noticing a significant improvement as some of his strength returns. He stretches, glancing around the room until he spots his mother speaking to a nurse. Tears fill her eyes as she thanks the nurse, who in turn offers her comfort, acknowledging her struggle and empathizing with her situation. Seeing this, the protagonist realizes just how difficult the past 10 years must have been for his mother. His heart tightens with emotion, and as he clenches his fists, he silently vows to protect her now that he has finally returned. He heads to the washroom and shouts, "Pantheon!" Instantly, his soul is drawn into the Pantheon. Upon arrival, he asks whether the system can accelerate the implementation process. The system responds affirmatively, allowing him to select the difficulty level for the random quests. Recalling his status as the Demon Lord, he boldly sets the difficulty level to Hell, the highest and most challenging tier available. In response, a dark orb materializes before him. As it shatters, the sight that emerges leaves him wide-eyed in astonishment. Standing before him is none other than the absolute ruler of Hell, an exact mirror image of the protagonist, but in his full strength. The protagonist summons his sword, adrenaline rushing through his veins at the thought of battle. Wasting no time, his replica charges forward, delivering a powerful overhead strike. Struggling, the protagonist narrowly blocks the attack, his arms trembling under the force. The replica relentlessly presses on, attacking from all angles, searching for even the smallest gap in his defense. The protagonist quickly realizes that if this fight continues much longer, the odds will shift further against him. In a sudden, calculated move, the replica identifies an opening and strikes, hurling the protagonist across the arena. Gasping for breath, he mutters to himself that this replica feels more like the real deal. Yet a sly grin spreads across his face. He has a trick up his sleeve. Determined to shift the battle, he activates blood neutralization, nullifying the effects of his double's attacks. Even as the replica's sword slashes at him, he feels no pain, quickly seizing the advantage to slam his opponent into the ground. But the moment of triumph is fleeting. To his dismay, the replica proves just as resilient, activating the same skill. Their fight continues, more intense than ever. The protagonist soon finds himself impaled by the replica's sword, the sharp pain grounding him in the reality of this life-or-death battle. Meanwhile, a cleaning lady lady approaches the bathroom door, ready to enter after hearing no response. However, just as she reaches for the handle, she's abruptly called to an urgent task on the third floor. Back in the Pantheon, the protagonist feels desperation creeping in. The weight of potential failure looms over him. He knows losing now would render all his efforts meaningless. Frantically, he searches for a way to turn the tide in his favor. As his mind races, he remembers the nutritional tonics stored in his inventory. Each tonic can restore 20% of his stamina. He calculates that 5 bottles could bring him back to full strength, igniting a faint flicker of hope. With no time to hesitate, he retrieves one and downs it, immediately feeling the surge of restored energy coursing through his body. His double attempts to interrupt, but the protagonist counters with a fearless punch, sending the replica hurtling backward. Regaining his confidence, he pulls out 2 more tonics and drinks them without pause. His double, however, is relentless and counters with a swift, brutal roundhouse kick. Dodging with skill, the protagonist drinks a 3rd tonic, pushing himself to recover further. Their movements blur as they exchange strikes faster than the eye can follow. Despite this, the protagonist manages to finish his 4th tonic. Yet frustration gnaws at him. Despite his renewed strength, the replica remains an equally formidable foe. The doppelganger wastes no time trapping him in a chokehold, a malicious grin spreading as its blade closes in on its prey. With seconds to spare, the protagonist devises a clever plan to turn the tables. Summoning his blade, he drives it into the replica's abdomen. The doppelganger freezes in disbelief as its own weapon vanishes, snatched away into the protagonist's inventory. With a triumphant smirk, the protagonist watches his once overconfident replica crumble to its knees. The Pantheon's announcement window blazes to life, declaring his victory. He has achieved 100% implementation and regained his peak physical form. As an added reward, he now possesses the ability to use the Hell system on Earth. His hospital clothes shred as his newly restored, battle-scarred physique is revealed. Memories flood back, reminding him of the suffering that shaped him. A sense of déjà vu washes over, but he brushes it aside, commanding the system to return him to Earth. Before leaving, a panel appears with unread messages. Curious, he selects them and is met with congratulations for ascending to the title of monarch. The messages explain that after the previous monarch departed, the heavenly beings took control of Hell, imprisoning the demons. Scoffing at the irony of Hell seeking his aid, the protagonist mocks them, flipping off the screen with vengeful satisfaction. He exits the Pantheon, leaving the hordes of monsters stunned by their bleak future. Back on Earth, the protagonist casually performs gravity-defying one-handed push-ups while his mother and the doctor watch in stunned silence. The doctor, piecing together the clues, concludes that the protagonist has awakened, though his mother remains skeptical of her son's miraculous recovery. Despite the doctor's reassurance, she expresses a deep desire to understand how such a transformation could have occurred. The doctor suggests visiting the Awakener Association, a suggestion the protagonist overhears. Later, as they sit in a taxi, the protagonist reflects on his mother's conversation with the doctor. Questions swirl in his mind. What secrets might his mother be hiding? And what has happened on Earth during his absence? Staring out the window, his thoughts remain clouded with uncertainty. Upon returning home, his mother excuses herself, saying she'll be back shortly. As he enters the house, he is startled to find a girl with cotton candy-colored hair rifling through a drawer for money. The sight confuses him. He doesn't recognize her. Before he can ask, his mother hurries in, breaking the silence. She introduces the girl as Han Jisoo, his sister. Shock floods him as he realizes the unfamiliar girl is his only sibling. Jisoo, however, seems uninterested in pleasantries. Ignoring her mother's scolding for taking money, she readies herself to leave. The protagonist, still processing the revelation, listens as Jisoo bitterly remarks on how their mother has endured the last 10 years of hardship. Her words cut deep, leaving him regretful for his inability to help. As Jisoo heads out, their mother pleads for her to at least say where she's going. Before the tension can settle, loud banging at the door interrupts the moment. Debt collectors have returned, threatening to break in if the door isn't opened. The house falls silent, but the protagonist's anger ignites. Fury burns in his eyes as he prepares to deliver well-deserved retribution. Growing tired of waiting outside, the man in the silver suit kicks the door impatiently. Inside, their mother pleads with Jisoo to return to the safety of the house, but Jisoo stands her ground, unshaken. The silver suit glances at the thug accompanying him, debating whether they should just break the door down. To their surprise, Jisoo steps outside, scowling as she complains about how annoyingly loud they're being. Momentarily caught off guard, the silver suit quickly recovers and concludes that she must be the daughter they've come for. Seizing the opportunity, he barges into the house angrily, while his sleazy, lecherous partner leers at Jisoo. Their mother trembles as she hurriedly pulls cash from her purse, offering it to appease them. But her attempt to de-escalate is met with cruelty. The silver suit viciously slaps her, the blows sending her frail body to the floor. Watching his mother being mistreated, the protagonist seethes with rage. Without hesitation, he lands a single, devastating punch, sending the silver suit flying across the room. The thug stammers in confusion, asking what's happening, while the once confident silver suit groans on the floor, whining about being bullied. The thug looks on in disbelief as the protagonist mocks them for conveniently showing up on his doorstep. He then grabs the thug by the jaw, preparing to deliver justice. What follows is a flurry of strikes. 1, 5, 10, then 100 slaps later, the thug collapses in pain, his face swollen and unrecognizable. Desperate, the thug spots a wooden chair, grabs it, and swings it with all his might. But the protagonist punches straight through it, sending splinters flying as the thug is launched into a wall, landing limply beside his partner. Panicking, the silver suit pulls out a dagger and attempts to threaten the protagonist. Unfazed, the protagonist grabs his wrist, twisting it with such force that it dislocates, leaving the man howling in agony. The thug, nursing his wounds, warns the protagonist that he won't get away unscathed. However, the protagonist merely smirks, proposing a savage solution: leave no witnesses. Just as he's about to finish them off, his mother's anguished scream breaks through his fury. Begging him to stop, she pleads for mercy. The two battered debt collectors scramble out of the house, tripping over each other as they flee to their car. Inside, they sit trembling, discussing how a comatose boy could become so terrifyingly strong. Nursing his injuries, the silver suit anxiously asks what they should do next. But before they can formulate a plan, he spots Jisa in the distance. Back at home, the protagonist's mother explains how she was forced to sell their house and store after his collapse. With the savings gone, she resorted to borrowing from 3 loan sharks, but the interest had ballooned the debt into an impossible sum. Curious about Jisoo, the protagonist learns she had to drop out of school to work at a restaurant, helping to pay off the debt. His mother, eyes glistening with tears, reveals how Jisoo worked tirelessly, day and night, just to support him. Gritting his teeth, the protagonist laments that his sister should never have had to sacrifice her future. His mother then shares that, despite Jisoo's best efforts, it wasn't enough, and for the past few months, she's been going to an unknown place. Heartbroken, the protagonist wishes they had let him die instead of enduring such hardship. His mother, however, gently reassures him that saving him was never a burden. Their somber moment is interrupted by a phone call. Seeing it's from the debt collectors, the protagonist takes the phone. Mocking them, he demands answers, but his confidence is shaken as the voice on the other end threatens him. His sister is bound in duct tape, her muffled sobs audible. The thug demands 100 million within 24 hours if he wants Jisoo to be safe. Furious, the protagonist grips the phone tightly. When his mother asks what's wrong, he brushes it off, saying he'll be back shortly. She warns him not to hurt or kill anyone, reminding him of the consequences, but he reassures her, knowing violence alone won't solve the problem. To his surprise, the mention of the word hell summons a fiery system panel. Accepting its offer, he chooses a basic skill, Shadow Wraith. Meanwhile, the gangsters are transporting Jisoo in an elevator. The thug taunts her, reminding her of her role as a hostage. Suddenly, the lights flicker and sparks fly, halting the elevator. The thug panics as a figure materializes inside the confined space. It's the protagonist, his form seemingly summoned from the shadows. He sarcastically remarks that he's there to deliver the money. Without warning, the Shadow Wraith slams the silver suit's head into the elevator wall. The thug panics, realizing the protagonist is a hidden awakener. Jisoo, too, is stunned by this revelation. When the elevator doors open, the thug stumbles out, shouting to the gang about the awakener's presence. But before he can say more, a sharp strike to his nape silences him. The gangsters grab their weapons, enraged by the audacity of this intruder. The Wraith greets them menacingly, teleporting behind the first assailant to deliver a knockout kick. As chaos ensues, the Wraith unleashes havoc upon the gang. Once the dust settles, he approaches Jisoo, carefully removing her restraints. She hesitates to leave, worried about him, but he reassures her with an aura of calm determination. As the elevator doors close, Jisoo watches in silence, while the Wraith turns to face his next opponent, ready for another round of destruction. Grunts of pain echoed throughout the halls, where only unconscious bodies littered the ground. It was clear that our protagonist was ascending the building, clearing each floor one by one. As he neared another group of gangsters enjoying a smoke, he mockingly joked about how weak everyone was and how the lack of a challenge frustrated him. Irritated by his insult, the gangsters charged at him, but like all the others before them, they were utterly demolished. One of the gangsters, desperate, called their boss, a man with tattoos sprawling across his massive muscles. Relaxing in a sauna, the boss berated his subordinate for calling him during his downtime, reminding him never to disturb him unless it was an emergency. However, the panicked gangster insisted that he come quickly. Furious at being ordered around, the boss crushed his phone in anger. But as he overheard the sound of his underling being knocked out mid-call, he realized something was wrong. Rising from his seat, he clenched his gigantic fist, preparing to take take action. Meanwhile, back at the gang's headquarters, the aftermath of the battle was evident. Numerous bloody and beaten bodies were strewn across the floor. The protagonist approached another trembling gangster, who begged for mercy. Before the wretch could flee, a wall exploded open, catching even the protagonist off guard. Emerging from the debris was the boss, a towering behemoth who immediately grasped the protagonist's face and slammed it into the ground with a roar of rage. The boss unleashed his fury, blaming the protagonist for the chaos and daring to challenge his gang. As the protagonist appeared, dusting himself off as though nothing had happened, he taunted the boss, questioning whether he, too, was an awakener. Grinning confidently, the boss declared that he would send the protagonist straight to hell. The mention of the word hell struck a nerve with our hero, and his expression darkened. The boss flexed his muscles, causing his clothes to tear from his enhanced size. Yet the protagonist was unfazed. As the battle commenced, the protagonist bashed the boss's face into a wall with a single blow, taunting him for being a weakling despite his size. The boss, refusing to admit defeat, launched a counterattack but was promptly humbled by a well-placed kick to his chiseled face. With a flurry of strikes, the protagonist overwhelmed the behemoth, explaining to him the true meaning of hell and the misery it brings. The once proud boss, now terrified and shattered, begged for a timeout. Offering money and anything he possessed in exchange for his life, he pointed the protagonist toward the gang's hidden safe. As the boss fled like a coward, he finally reached his white car in the parking lot, thinking he was safe. Rambling about how he would make the protagonist pay, he froze in terror as his nemesis appeared behind him, whispering that he had forgotten to ask for the safe's password. Panicking, the boss went into a frenzy, but the protagonist ensured he wouldn't forget who he was dealing with. Later, money rained down from a portal in front of the protagonist, totaling over 500 million won. Grinning like a greedy goblin, he relished the possibilities, apartments, luxuries, and more. Eager to spend, he walked into a mall and became captivated by the latest foldable phones. The shopkeeper informed him that one model was priced at 2.99 million won. Intrigued, the protagonist also examined another phone resembling the Samsung Z Flip. Without hesitation, he slapped 5 million won on the counter and purchased both models outright. The shopkeeper accepted the cash with mild suspicion, wondering if he had overcharged the young man. Returning home, the protagonist casually dropped off his shopping bags. His mother called him to join her for a meal, but he replied that he needed to head out. Before she could ask where he was going, he had already vanished. In truth, he had been invited to dinner by his friend, Chanho. Upon seeing the protagonist, Chanho was visibly shocked by his transformation. His physique had undergone a drastic change since they had last met. Over drinks, they began catching up. Chanho asked the protagonist about his future plans, reminding him that they were no longer carefree school kids. The protagonist steered the conversation toward real estate, inquiring how many apartments could be bought with 500 million won. Momentarily surprised, Chanho asked if the protagonist truly had such money, but quickly shifted to discussing the economy. He explained that 500 million won would barely cover a lease on a modest apartment in the outskirts of the city. This revelation unsettled the protagonist, who then asked how much it would cost to buy a place in the city. Chanho informed him it would take at least 2 billion won. Shifting the conversation, Chanho got to the heart of the matter, asking if the protagonist was an awakener. The protagonist replied that he first needed to understand what that truly meant. As they exited the restaurant, Chanho began explaining. After the protagonist's coma, mysterious portals known as gates began appearing worldwide. At first, these gates were seen as a minor threat. However, when monsters began escaping, they caused catastrophic gate fractures. These monsters wreaked havoc, and humanity soon discovered that conventional weapons were useless against them. Interrupting, the protagonist asked if guns or cannons couldn't harm the creatures. Chanho confirmed they were ineffective. Over time, humanity developed special weapons called aura weapons, crafted from monster byproducts. Those capable of wielding them became known as awakeners, heroes who protected humanity from extinction. In an attempt to impress, the protagonist pulled out one of his newly bought foldable phones. However, his confidence shattered when he learned such phones were now given away for free. Embarrassed, the protagonist chose to keep the matter to himself. Chanho shifted back to the topic, explaining that even without an aura weapon, awakeners could harness aura to enhance their physical abilities. He mentioned hearing about the protagonist's improved physique and recent exploits against a notorious gang. The protagonist, feigning indifference, subtly hinted at exploiting their friendship, which irritated Chanho. Before their argument could escalate, the sky above them darkened as a gate fracture suddenly appeared. Monsters began pouring into their midst, turning their casual night out into a fight for survival. As the monsters pounded their wooden weapons against the ground, the earth quaked violently, mimicking an earthquake. The sheer force sent ripples of fear through the nearby citizens, leaving them trembling in in terror. With menacing growls, the monsters ignited panic, causing the crowd to scatter in every direction, desperate to escape. The protagonist, however, couldn't identify these creatures. They were unlike anything he had encountered in hell. Without hesitation, he drove his foot into the ground, dislodging a large chunk of the road and hurling it toward the oncoming beasts. Yet, before the debris could connect, a glimmering shield materialized, deflecting his attack. Chanho quickly reminded the protagonist that conventional attacks wouldn't work against these monsters. One of the creatures advanced, and Chanho closed his eyes, certain that their time had come. But the sickening sound of splattering blood made him peek, and to his shock, he saw the monster lying beheaded, with the protagonist standing resolute. By sheer physical power alone, the protagonist proved he could take down these enemies. Chanho stood in disbelief, watching as his friend effortlessly dismantled an entire horde of monsters. For a brief moment, he wondered if the protagonist had awakened a B-class power. But this wasn't the time to dwell on such thoughts. Shifting his focus to the panicked citizens, Chanho shouted, rallying them to follow him to safety, assuring them that he knew a secure route through the sewers. Before they could act, more monsters surrounded the group. A young girl froze in fear, tears streaming down her face. And just as a monster lunged toward her, Chanho sprang into action, pulling her out of harm's way. The protagonist seized the opportunity, taking the monster down with ease. With a playful smirk, he teased Chanho for getting in his way, advising him to find cover since he was exposed in the open. Chanho ignored the jibe, taking command of the situation and guiding the people toward the sewers. Meanwhile, a young vlogger had begun live streaming the protagonist's battle. His audience grew rapidly, captivated by the display of heroism. As the protagonist continued fighting, the vlogger excitedly shouted for him to watch his back. However, the warning came too late. One of the monsters slammed the protagonist into a parked car with a thunderous crash. Smirking at the spectacle, the vlogger cared only about the content, knowing that footage of a hero struggling would generate massive views. In the meantime, the crowd successfully reached the sewers. Chanho reunited the young girl with her mother, who embraced her tightly, overwhelmed with relief. A nearby man turned to Chanho, asking if he intended to go back. Chanho hesitated, aware that his friend was still locked in battle. The scene shifted to the protagonist, cornered by a group of monsters. One, seemingly confident, prepared to strike, while the vlogger, too terrified to watch, covered his eyes. Against all expectations, the protagonist dodged the attack with astonishing agility. Addressing the monster calmly, he thanked it for inadvertently helping restore a portion of his mana and, in return, promised a swift and painless death. Without mercy, he launched into a precise and brutal assault, eliminating his foes. As the live stream continued, viewers flooded the comments, complaining about the poor video quality and urging the vlogger to move closer. Among them, a user named Slayer donated 5 million won, offering another 5 million if the vlogger could get a clear shot of the protagonist in action. The tension rose as the stakes increased for both the vlogger and the protagonist. Tempted by the money, the vlogger wrestled with his fear but couldn't bring himself to approach the chaos. Meanwhile, the protagonist tore through the monsters with overwhelming strength, though he quickly realized that the intense combat was draining his mana reserves at an alarming rate. Viewers continued making demands, with one offering additional payment for clear footage and requesting the vlogger's email. Overwhelmed by the surge of donations and sponsorships, the vlogger felt a mix of exhilaration and dread. Then, a new donation of 20 million won came in, with the donor requesting detailed information about the mysterious hero. Elsewhere, high-profile viewers, clearly leaders of powerful clans, watched in fascination. They saw potential in the protagonist, both as an impressive fighter and a possible ally for their own schemes. On the battlefield, the protagonist had decimated so many monsters that the rest now cowered in fear. Their leader, however, betrayed no such weakness. In a chilling display of dominance, it killed one of its own minions before stepping forward to face the protagonist. Meanwhile, the vlogger, emboldened by greed, prepared to move closer for better footage. Just as he steeled himself, Chanho appeared, startling him and demanding to know why he hadn't evacuated. Frightened by the sudden encounter, the vlogger dropped his phone. Furious comments poured in, mocking him for his cowardice. Chanho dragged the reluctant vlogger toward a nearby building, but the kid resisted, consumed by thoughts of fame and fortune. A monster suddenly appeared, stomping on the fallen phone and crushing it. In utter shock, the vlogger fainted. Before the monster could harm them further, the protagonist intervened, dispatching it with a single, swift motion. With the battlefield cleared, the protagonist turned to Chanho and asked why he had returned return despite the danger. Chanho admitted he was worried sick about his friend. In response, the protagonist requested 20 minutes, explaining that he needed to visit a specific location. Chanho reassured him that he could take his time, mentioning that reinforcements from the clans would be arriving soon. Seeing the confusion on Chanho's face, the protagonist promised to explain later. He stepped into the Pantheon, leaving Chanho to watch in stunned silence as he opened a gate. Left to wonder how his friend had gained such an ability and what had changed since their last meeting, Chanho resolved to stand by the protagonist's side, no matter what lay ahead. Entering the Pantheon, the protagonist scoffs, visibly irritated by the state of his body after such a minor battle. A panel appears, revealing his mana reserves are down to a meager 10%. Frustrated with his pitiful levels, he begins searching for a way to restore his strength quickly. He soon discovers that to regain his full power, he must relive the experiences recorded in his journal, with rewards reflecting the trials he endures. A wave of déjà vu washes over him as memories of the journal that kept him sane during his time in Hell resurface. Without hesitation, he agrees to the trial. In an instant, the journal materializes before him, releasing massive gusts of energy as it signals the beginning of the challenge. As memories of his suffering flood his mind, the journal bursts into flames, leaving behind a bitter aftertaste of the pain he had once endured. Determined to restore his mana, the protagonist commands the recreation of page 16, which details 5 grueling years in Hell. Meanwhile, back on Earth, Chanho escorts the vlogger kid, who awkwardly attempts to fish for information about their hero. Trying to sound casual, the kid questions where the badass monster fighter had disappeared to. Unimpressed, Chanho casts a scornful glance at the cowardly kid, wondering aloud why anyone would pay 20 million won just for a photo of his friend. Feigning ignorance, the kid stammers out a weak response, but their conversation is interrupted by a deafening sound that rattles them both. Remaining calm, Chanho instructs the kid to follow him silently toward the gathering point. As his phone vibrates, Chanho reads a message from his leader, informing him that due to it being the weekend, reinforcements will be delayed, urging him to escape as soon as possible. Distressed by the news, Chanho can only hope his demon-hunting friend returns before it's too late. Meanwhile, in another dimension, the protagonist finds himself reliving his time in the forest of predators. Gentle winds rustle the leaves, but an eerie silence sets him on edge. A panel appears, announcing his task, to subjugate 10 white colossi, the so-called divine beings of the forest. Clueless about his opponent's whereabouts, the protagonist surveys the area, oblivious to the massive shadow looming overhead. Suddenly, the colossal robot locks onto him, its eyes glowing a menacing crimson before unleashing a blinding energy beam. Sensing danger just in time, the protagonist narrowly evades the attack, barely avoiding incineration. Through the dissipating fog, he catches sight of the white colossus. As he sizes up this so-called divine creation, its hand surges toward him like a massive drill. Unimpressed, he counters with a devastating punch, slamming his fist into the automaton's metallic face. The impact sends the machine stumbling backward. In a desperate move, the robot's fingers extend like razor-sharp blades, attempting to ensnare him. However, the protagonist dodges effortlessly, landing a crushing blow to the automaton's abdomen. The sheer force tears the machine apart from top to bottom, leaving nothing but smoldering scraps in his wake. Pausing to await his next challenger, his eyes are drawn to a strange red core lying amid the debris. Back on Earth, Chanho and the vlogger kid arrive on a rooftop, only to be met with the horrifying sight of slaughtered bodies scattered around them. Horrified, Chanho spots a gravely injured man clinging to life. He and the vlogger rush over to assist, but with trembling lips, the dying man struggles to warn Chanho of a looming threat. Confused, Chanho turns, only to come face to face with a giant goblin-like monster wielding a massive wooden club just a few feet away. Concerned about the injured man, the vlogger suggests moving him, but Chanho dismisses the idea, grimly stating that the man's time has already passed. As the cowardly kid freezes in fear, Chanho snaps at him to wake up unless he wants to die. With a deafening roar, the giant monster leaps into the air, ready to crush them. But for now, the scene shifts back to the Pantheon, where the protagonist analyzes the red core. He discovers that the divine machines have a self-repair feature, allowing them to rebuild themselves, becoming stronger and more adaptive against their opponents. Numerous panels appear, detailing this frustrating ability. Catching on quickly, the protagonist dashes forward and punches the core. To his irritation, the attack is easily repelled, the core's surface bouncing his strike back as if made of jelly. At only 3% restored, the core resists his blows. Landing atop it, visibly irritated, he unleashes a rage-fueled punch, producing only a few sparks of red lightning. Despite his relentless strikes, the core's recovery progresses smoothly. At 70% restoration, error alarms begin blaring. Just as he prepares a decisive attack, a laser beam narrowly misses him, forcing him to dodge. Turning, he realizes he has been surrounded by other robots. The The colossi launch a coordinated barrage of lasers from all directions. Dodging with ninja-like agility, the protagonist becomes acutely aware of his dire situation. To make matters worse, the core's restoration silently nears 98%. Undeterred, the protagonist refuses to surrender. Pushing through the relentless assault of lasers, he manages to reach the core and obliterate it at the very last second. Frustrated by the overwhelming odds, he digs through his memories for a solution. Before he can fully form a plan, a sudden, searing headache overwhelms him. With memories of past battles flooding back, he devises a strategy to give these mechanical nightmares the beating they truly deserve. Meanwhile, back on Earth, Chanho and the vlogger kid sprint for their lives, the monstrous creature looming overhead. The two split up strategically, throwing the oversized brute into confusion as it struggles to decide which one to chase. Their plan is simple: loop back and re-enter the building where the massive of the Hulk can't follow. Despite the creature's giant arm reaching in desperation to grab them, they manage to slip inside, buying themselves a brief moment to catch their breath. Once the beast finally gives up, Chanho seizes the chance to make his escape while he still can. Elsewhere, in another dimension, the protagonist is a whirlwind of motion, darting and leaping between divine machines, narrowly avoiding their unrelenting laser beams. His mission is to cause as much disruption as possible, drawing the attention of every automaton in the vicinity. When he succeeds in gathering their attention, he dashes far away, leading the heavenly swarm to a clearing in the forest. Here, he finally halts, giving the enemies a chance to lock on and ready their attacks. But suddenly, one of the colossal robots drops to its knees. The others pay no mind to their fallen comrade, focusing instead on the protagonist, who sits casually, flipping them a defiant gesture. In moments, the entire lineup of machines begins to collapse as the swamp whale, the true namesake of the forest, emerges. A monstrous jaw bursts from the ground, consuming the divine machines one by one. Reliving his nightmarish past, the protagonist watches from a safe distance as the behemoth handles the challenge for him. With all 10 heavenly entities destroyed, a congratulatory system message pops up. His rewards include enhanced physical strength, increased mana reserves, and a new weapon, the Dagger of Judgment. Inspecting the dagger, he discovers its unique ability. It acts as a remotely controlled weapon within a 100-meter radius. Not bad for an unexpected gift. After testing his cool new toy, the protagonist decides to return to Earth. The scene transitions to a news broadcast revisiting the moment the gate first opened. The anchor solemnly reports the tragic destruction that has claimed countless lives. A pale professor, who exudes the vibe of someone who ruins family gatherings with politics, blames the Awakeners Association for the disaster. He accuses them of taking too many breaks and neglecting their responsibilities, leading to a shortage of hunters when they're most needed. Fractures, he argues, don't care whether hunters are on vacation or working, and the association should be held accountable. Meanwhile, a man with a man bun watches the broadcast on his phone, visibly irritated by the professor's comments. Frustrated, he mutters about how poorly association hunters are paid compared to clan hunters. Hearing his partner's complaints, the team leader next to him advises him to focus on delivering results instead of griping, warning that failure could cost them their jobs. Their conversation is interrupted by breaking news of a lone awakener who managed to eliminate the monsters at the disaster site. Back at the scene, the vlogger boy and Chanho hide in a room, anxiously awaiting a rescue squad. Loud noises suddenly erupt, and the room begins to quake violently. As they cautiously peek outside, the roof collapses, sending them into a panic. Chanho wonders if their time has come, but it turns out to be their starving friend, the protagonist, standing triumphantly on top of the beheaded remains of the hulking beast. Chanho is elated to see his friend, who somehow manages a wry smile despite his injuries. Noticing something amiss, Chanho asks if he's okay. Groaning, the protagonist demands food, specifically grilled meat. The other two stare at him in disbelief, baffled that he's thinking about a meal during such dire circumstances. With no chicken available, the protagonist evaluates the monster meat and starts eating, much to the disgust of his companions. Just as the vlogger boy begins to lose hope, a soldier arrives, filling him with relief. However, the soldier ignores the vlogger and directs his gratitude and awe toward the protagonist, oblivious to what he's eating. Chanho quickly steps in, introducing his friend and pulling him aside before the situation gets more awkward. The soldier, however, explains they can't leave the site just yet. Smirking, Chanho pulls out his clan ID card, which immediately changes the soldier's tone. Impressed, he agrees to escort them to safety. Elsewhere, Manbun Guy is dry-heaving at the sight of the mutilated monster remains. Annoyed, the team leader yells at him to stop wasting time and search for survivors instead of acting useless. Reluctantly, Manbun convinces a soldier to help him access a restricted area, flashing his credentials as an association hunter. Meanwhile, the team leader silently ponders who or what could have caused such brutal destruction. The scene shifts to Chanho's car. He suggests the protagonist stay at his apartment, but the latter, ever a family man, man, insists on checking in with his loved ones. Chanho reminds him that showing up in his current state would only terrify his family. After a quick self-check, the protagonist concedes and settles on calling his mother instead. After cleaning up, the two head to Chanho's apartment, where they finally relax and enjoy some fried chicken. The protagonist is impressed by Chanho's luxurious home. As they sit down to eat, the protagonist recalls Chanho's comment about the crazy money hunters make. Chanho confirms this but notes that hunters can be seen as scammers given their exorbitant pay. When asked if he's considered becoming a hunter, the protagonist grunts while devouring a chicken wing. Chanho, slightly unnerved, explains that with his abilities, he'd easily be in A rank, allowing him access to elite clans and massive income. Curious, the protagonist asks if there's a rank higher than A. Chanho explains that only 5 out of 200 million awakened individuals have achieved S rank. With a playful grin, Chanho jokes that his friend shouldn't aim for such lofty heights. A rank is more than enough. Inspired, the protagonist agrees to give it a shot, and the two toast to the new endeavor. The scene then cuts to a group of mobsters dining in a fancy restaurant. A man with long hair repeats himself to a terrified, trembling bald gangster. He mockingly asks if it's true that an entire organization was taken down by a single hooded boy. Wiping his mouth with exaggerated elegance, he calls the situation utterly embarrassing. The brown-haired manager of the Hongma clan, Li Wu, rises from his seat and sarcastically asks why Baldy didn't run away instead of coming to him. With a chilling expression, Li places a hand on Baldy's shoulder, his eyes glinting with malice. He inquires if Baldy is shaking because of the corpse in the room, causing the gangster to sweat profusely. Tears streaming down his face, Baldy begs Sukwu to spare his life, unlike the unfortunate soul lying lifeless just a few meters away. Sukwu gently pats Baldy's head and calmly explains that his only concern is the stolen money. He bluntly states his intention to take the gang's hidden stash as well. Paralyzed by fear, Baldy tries to feign ignorance, remaining utterly silent. Frozen in terror, Baldy watches as Sukwu quietly contemplates his fate. Unexpectedly, the long-haired man steps back, claiming he believes Baldy's words. Yet, moments after showing gratitude for the information, the freshly shaved bald head in Sukwu's grasp explodes. Barely acknowledging the geyser of blood, Sukwu casually picks up his tablet. He instructs a woman lurking in the shadows to track down the culprit. Elsewhere, our protagonist finally arrives at the Hunter Association. Chanho reminds him to use formal language if he doesn't want to stand out awkwardly. Nervous like a father awaiting his child's exam results, Chanho asks him to send a text once it's over. As he approaches the front gate, our protagonist observes the peculiar crowd of individuals gathered to apply. Fixated on the financial rewards, he ignores the others and heads straight to lab number 3. After securing a spot in the queue, he glances at his phone and notices a message from his mother asking when he'll be home. Not wanting to worry her, he replies that he'll take a shower and head back soon. As expected, she asks if he's been eating properly, making him smile and look forward to seeing her. His quiet moment is interrupted by a clerk informing him it's his turn. Just then, a delusional old man starts loudly proclaiming he's awakened, despite staff assurances that the meter is functioning correctly. Refusing to back down, the man claims his sudden hair loss is proof of his awakening, drawing laughter from the once annoyed crowd. The old man insists on recognition and refuses to leave. Growing impatient, our protagonist grabs the man's shiny scalp, silencing him with an overpowering aura. Even so, the old man stubbornly argues that the meter is broken. A hunter steps in to check, placing his hand on the orb. It sparks and glows green, confirming he is C rank. Humiliated, the old man breaks into a sweat as the clerk gleefully shows him out. Branded a fraud, his continued complaints make our protagonist cringe. Finally, it's the protagonist's turn. The clerk whispers to her colleague, speculating he might be the day's highest ranker due to his intimidating aura, but he dismisses their chatter with a light tap on the head. With the clerk's encouragement, he steps up to the manometer. Suddenly, chaos breaks out at the Korean Hunter Association. Pandemonium spreads as urgent calls direct the branch manager to examination room 3 on the 6th floor. Suspicious of the abrupt summons, he briefly entertains the idea of a 6th S-rank hunter emerging but dismisses it as improbable. Reaching the 6th floor, the manager finds a crowd gathered outside room 3. Forcing his way through, he sees the cause of the commotion. The crystal meter orb is shattered, resembling the fragments of a broken egg. Anxiously, he demands an explanation from his staff. They report that when the protagonist placed his hand on the orb, its colors flickered uncontrollably before it abruptly exploded in a puff of smoke, leaving everyone baffled. The manager, frustrated, suggests the meter may have been defective. However, the staff clarifies that 3 different meters were used, and all met the same fate. Realizing the impossibility of 3 faulty devices, the manager grows uneasy. Meanwhile, the protagonist quietly hopes he won't be charged for the damages. He asks the manager about his results but is met with confusion. The manager manager explains that using more meters could lead to similar destruction and acknowledges that this is unprecedented. As a result, they'll rely on the license test alone to determine his rank. Normally, this test is only part of the assessment, but in his case, it will be the sole deciding factor. The protagonist questions the validity of the test. A staff member steps forward to explain the system in detail, aiming to reassure him. With no other choice, the protagonist nods, accepts the arrangement, and departs. The branch manager, still puzzled, reflects on the strange incident. As the protagonist exits the Hunter Association, he ponders the bizarre events. His phone rings. It's Chanho. The protagonist explains that his rank is pending a borderline judgment. Finding this odd, Chanho asks if the meter malfunctioned. With a hint of amusement, the protagonist shares that it actually shattered. Familiar with his chaotic tendencies, Chanho jokes about whether he was up to something mischievous, but the protagonist assures him he followed the rules. Chanho admits he'd expected something unusual all along. Moments after the call ends, the protagonist's heightened senses detect a threat. He immediately realizes a sniper is targeting him from afar. Finger position on the trigger, ready to fire. The sniper lady murmurs softly, observing that the protagonist doesn't seem powerful at all. She is confident that a single bullet will be enough to end him, despite the rumors of his strength. Yet, just as she prepares to pull the trigger, something feels off. Her confidence falters as she realizes she's been detected. It's unthinkable to her. No target has ever noticed her before. The protagonist points at his head, his expression dark with anger, and gestures for her to take a closer look. The sniper's heart races. Not only has she been spotted, but the protagonist's voice somehow carries across an impossible distance. Trembling with fear, she quickly steadies herself and fires. An explosion echoes, and for a fleeting moment, she feels triumphant, certain her target is dead. But as the smoke clears, the protagonist stands there, completely unscathed. Despite using an aura-charged bullet, it has had no effect. Panic starts to grip her as she considers fleeing. However, just as she turns to escape, the protagonist's dagger flies through the air, striking her leg and sending her crashing to the ground. When she lifts her gaze, her blood runs cold. The protagonist looms above her, his presence chillingly reminiscent of a nightmare brought to life. Keeping a calm but menacing tone, the protagonist mocks her, claiming the bullet hit him but couldn't hurt him. The sniper, panicked, pulls out a handgun and points it at him, demanding to know his origin. Without hesitation, the protagonist replies that he comes from hell itself. She refuses to believe him, her fear mounting. She fires a series of aura bullets, desperately hoping to bring him down. But suddenly, the protagonist appears behind her, taking her completely by surprise. She can't comprehend it. She was certain he had fallen. Before she can react, he grabs her by the throat, throttling her, and slams her into a wall. Using his powers, he traps her in a sinister, sluggish substance that fills her with such terror that she faints. The protagonist, making it clear he doesn't intend to kill her just yet, retrieves the bullets she fired and begins searching her belongings for clues. Among her possessions, he finds family photos, prompting him to demand answers about who sent her to target him and his loved ones. The sniper, now awake and drenched in cold sweat, screams in horror as grotesque hands emerge, summoned by the protagonist's abilities. Adopting a gangster-like persona, he warns her to answer honestly if she values her life. Cornered and desperate, the sniper hesitates. She knows she cannot betray the Honma clan, but she quickly fabricates a story, claiming that Kim Songyun, a gangster the protagonist had once crushed in a private loan operation, was responsible. She pleads for her freedom, hoping the lie will satisfy him. The protagonist hurls a bullet at her shoulder, piercing it. She cries out, insisting she's told him everything. However, he remains suspicious, finding it odd that an assassin would divulge sensitive information so readily. Pressing her further, he asks again who ordered the hit, knowing she has already failed and that revealing the truth would lead to her death at the hands of the Honma clan. She defiantly declares she will never reveal the information, no matter what. In a final, desperate act, she tries to end her own life, but the protagonist intervenes, firing a shot that leaves a massive hole in her torso. She collapses, coughing blood, and dies. Frustrated at losing the chance to uncover the truth, the protagonist surveys her lifeless body, contemplating how to dispose of it. He recalls an artifact in his possession that might help but hesitates to use it. Instead, he flips through his journal, scanning 134 pages of notes, before opening a portal to the Pantheon. Despite the area being off-limits due to nearby gate fractures, he covers the body with a blue cloth and steps into the Forbidden Zone. Upon entering, he is greeted by the system and requests a recreation of the journal's 134th page, which details the Soul Prison, an artifact he had acquired long ago. The protagonist remembers that the soul prison once belonged to the Ghost King, one of Hell's 15 rulers. The artifact allows the summoning of the dead when infused with the user's blood. While initially hopeful about its potential, he had been disappointed when the commander it summoned proved too weak to be useful. As the 198th day of the 67th year is reconstructed, he considers using the soul prison to dispose of the body. Standing at the edge of the River of the Dead, the protagonist recalls that the Ghost King's territory lies across the water. Previously, a boat had been available to cross, but now there is none. Contemplating swimming, he dismisses the idea, knowing the water's corrosive properties would destroy him instantly. As he weighs his options, the first phase of a new challenge begins. Swarming toward him are small, celestial insect-like creatures known as righteous white pillars, which fire toxic sludge projectiles. The protagonist deftly evades the attacks, wondering if defeating these creatures will earn him a way to cross the river. Drawing his weapon, he slices through one of the bugs, which explodes into a shower of poison bombs resembling bullets. Realizing the risk of careless combat, he readies himself for the fight ahead. He fends off the incoming bugs with a simple barrier, though he finds the process slow and tedious, dealing with them one at a time. Frustrated, he quickly shifts his focus to another bug approaching him and dashes forward, effortlessly slaying the remainder of the swarm. His strikes cut through them with precision. After completing the quest, he gains a 50% implementation rate and is rewarded with an armor type called the Vermin's Blessing. The armor's attributes reveal that it grants its wearer immunity to the energy of the dead, hinting that it might allow him to swim without any hindrance. Without hesitation, he equips the armor and plunges into the river. While swimming, a notification appears, informing him that his skills are admired by the demon beasts of the Pantheon, who apologize for not being of greater assistance. This only irritates him further. He soon arrives at the Ghost King's territory, only to find that the undead castle has disappeared without a trace. Another notification appears, with the demon beasts apologizing for the castle's disappearance, which further aggravates him. He wonders if completing some side quests might lead him back to the castle. Just then, a towering structure called the Heavenly Obelisk emerges before him, featuring a gate at its base. As he contemplates when the next quest might start, a system window appears before his eyes, tasking him with defeating 1,000 heavenly creatures within 2 hours to complete the second quest. Almost immediately, a monster materializes before him, which he identifies as a commanding general. Mistaking them for demons, he commands the creatures to kneel before their lord. However, another notification informs him that the demon beasts are apologizing for their companion's betrayal. As the monsters charge toward him, he swiftly dispatches several of them but notices they lack their cores. He speculates that the obelisk might be responsible for this anomaly. Activating blood neutralization, he transforms into a half-human, half-demon hybrid, enhancing his stats and skill attack power by 300%. Empowered, he charges forward, cutting down large groups of commanding generals with ease. Upon reaching the pillar, he considers that destroying it from within might be more effective. He rushes toward the gate and enters the tower, annihilating all who oppose him. Within seconds, he destroys the entire structure. As the tower collapses, the coreless demons disintegrate, vanishing into thin air. With this, the second quest is completed, and the implementation rate of the soul prison reaches its target. As a reward, he receives 2 orbs, one purple and one orange. He picks up the purple orb first. To his delight, it is the weapon he had been searching for. The weapon grants him 3 abilities: imprisoning a dead target, resurrecting it, and peering into its memory. Although his primary goal was to collect corpses for information, he feels disappointed to learn that he can imprison only 20 souls at a time. Next, he collects the orange orb, which turns out to be a rune of expansion. Engraving the rune into his soul prison artifact increases its capacity from 20 to 100 souls, sufficient for his needs. Pleased, he gathers the soul prison and decides to leave the Pantheon, having completed his mission. Unexpectedly, the demon beasts send him another message, urging him to be cautious. Annoyed, he dismisses their warnings as trivial. A golden panel materializes in front of him, but he disregards it as irrelevant and exits the Pantheon. Returning to where he had left the sniper lady's corpse, he is surprised to find that she is missing. A corpse shouldn't be able to move on its own. Feeling drained, he decides to head home. When he arrives, his sister, Jisoo, peeks at him and comments on how late he is, pointing out that the rice soup has gone cold. She invites him inside and reheats the soup. As they eat, their mother switches off the television. The protagonist initiates a conversation, remarking on how much the world has changed. His mother, visibly concerned, apologizes for not telling him sooner, expressing her guilt for feeling inadequate as a parent. He reassures her, expressing gratitude that she has survived through everything. He then asks his mother and sister if there's anything they want for themselves. His mother, flustered, brushes off the question and simply offers him more soup. After their meal, he calls his friend, Chanho, and informs him that he plans to go underground for a while. Chanho asks if this is in preparation for the licensing exam. The protagonist explains that it's more like training and mentions that he found a bug that disappeared, which he needs to track down. His friend seems perplexed by the explanation. The protagonist then requests Chanho to take care of his sister and mother during his absence. Deciding to make himself visible to lure out those behind the sniper lady, he prepares for the next stage of his journey. The scene shifts to the Honma clan headquarters, where an intense discussion takes place about dealing with the extraordinary new hunter. Upon hearing about the slaughter of the B-rank assassin, a man named Sukwu suggests letting the matter go. However, with a devious smile, he proposes sabotaging the upcoming ranking test instead. While speaking, he turns toward Jinchul, an A-rank currently submerged in a water tank, and asks if he is prepared. Jinchul, exuding confidence, responds that he was born ready. A scientist readies a mysterious serum for infusion. Grinning wickedly, Sukwu warns Jinchul of the mind-shattering pain he's about to endure. Jinchul, unfazed, declares his readiness since joining the clan. Following Sukwu's approval, the scientist initiates the process. The water in the tank bubbles violently, causing Jinchul's veins to bulge visibly through his suit. Gritting his teeth, his eyes turn white, and magical energy starts to glow along his veins. Suddenly, the scientist begins sweating nervously, cautioning that Jinchul's life is at risk if they proceed further. Unperturbed, Sukwu dismisses the concern, coldly stating he would never recruit someone so weak. With 90% of the serum injected, Jinchul howls in agony, his eyes appearing ready to burst. As his heart rate flatlines and his body falls limp, the scientist declares him dead. Sukwu, however, silences him, and moments later, Jinchul's hands begin to twitch. His heart resumes beating, and with glowing green eyes now wide open, Jinchul shatters the tank with a single punch. Energy erupts from his body as he steps out, grinning maliciously. Sukwu, clearly delighted, praises his, and eagerly anticipates his performance in the coming days. Meanwhile, the protagonist is on a rooftop, chatting with his best friend, Chanho. His friend mentions needing to use the association's equipment, inspiring the protagonist to conduct his own experiment. Picking up a wooden stick, he discovers an overpowered loophole, invisible hell armor. Noticing the armor is entirely unseen, he retrieves the judgment dagger from his inventory. He commands the system to recognize the wooden stick as his dagger. The system complies, making the weapon vanish and confirming the stick is now imbued with the dagger's power. He realizes he can now defeat enemies using what looks like a simple twig. This realization sparks another idea, prompting him to re-enter the Pantheon. This time, he steps into the Flame King's domain, visibly displeased about returning. Suddenly, he is surrounded by an army of Oracle servants, snow-white armored wolves with crimson eyes. The system promptly presents him with a quest: eliminate 1,000 of these creatures in exchange for half of the Hellfire Great Sword. Annoyed at the trivial nature of the task, the protagonist slices his hand, summoning his shadow minions from the soul prison. As one wolf lunges at him, the protagonist remains unshaken. Employing his extraordinary speed and flying dagger, he cuts through the heavily armored wolves effortlessly. After dispatching 33 soldiers, he summons their shadows from the soul prison, creating an army of replicas. The Oracle minions freeze in confusion, faced with their doppelgangers. At his command, the shadow army charges forward. The two forces clash in a brutal battle while the protagonist nonchalantly lights a cigarette. However, he quickly coughs, baffled by how Chanho enjoys such a terrible thing. One of the wolves breaks through the shadow army and lunges at him. Before it can strike, shadowy arms rise from the ground to restrain the creature. The protagonist watches with satisfaction as his fearless, undying minions handle the battle. Frustrated with the slow progress, he decides to finish things swiftly. Realizing another quest stands between him and the weapon, he ignites a fiery aura and rockets into the sky like a firework. Determining the foes unworthy of even 2 hours of effort, he descends like a blinding golden comet. The impact creates a massive explosion, obliterating all the Oracle servants instantly. The scene transitions to the Soul Clan headquarters, where a samurai named Cho Young practices her skills. She slices through a holographic simulation of a purple, dummy-like monster with remarkable precision. Observing her through a glass window, the Soul Clan leader comments on her dangerous habits. The department head reassures him, stating they can correct her flaws within 10 days. Jun Young orders the simulation's difficulty to be increased, emphasizing the urgency of defeating the Honma clans. Adjusting his glasses, the department head asks if he's referring to Jinchul. Jun Young confirms, asserting that Cho Young would be unstoppable if not for the Honma clan's ace. Frustrated, he curses their underhanded tactics, but the department head tries to calm him, reminding him of previous bans. Jun Young retorts that the Honma clan always plays dirty and insists they will do so again in the upcoming competition. The department head points points out the obvious. The stage is set for the top two contenders, Cho-young and Jinchul. However, the perceptive clan leader speculates that this will only hold true if another monstrous underdog doesn't emerge to disrupt the balance. Meanwhile, our protagonist begins receiving messages of gratitude from the demons as he approaches the end of his quest. Irritated by the relentless notifications, he sits atop the corpses of his enemies, smoking, and grumbles about the lack of a mute button. Hearing one of the nearly dead wolves growl, he tells it to keep quiet while he finishes his cigarette and ends its life with a decisive stab. This final death marks his 1000th kill and rewards him with half of the Hellfire Great Sword. The souls of his enemies converge into an orb before him, forming a unique item. As he reads that he must offer it to an altar, the protagonist shows visible displeasure at the thought of searching for it like a mere commoner. However, as soon as he collects the soul stone, a massive structure emerges from the ground, sparing him the effort. Thus begins the second quest for the Great Sword. The ruler of Hell must now offer the soul stone and be recognized by the guardian serpent. Wasting no time, he places the stone into a sacrificial bowl. Suddenly, a gargantuan snake materializes. Narrowing his eyes, our protagonist prepares for battle, locking into an intense stare-down with the serpentine behemoth. A panel appears before him, outlining the victory condition: answer the serpent's questions. Puzzled, the protagonist scoffs at the idea of a quiz. Frustrated, he orders the snake to proceed with its questions. However, the guardian serpent's speech is so incoherent it sounds like garbled nonsense at double speed. Sighing in exasperation, our hero hurls his dagger directly into the snake's eye. The beast howls in agony, but the protagonist is far from satisfied. With a wave of his hand, he drives the dagger through the serpent's skull and out the other eye. Summoning his weapon back, the protagonist leaps toward the serpent, seething at the system for underestimating him. He pounds the serpent's head repeatedly until it swells grotesquely and finally bursts. Bathed in the creature's blood, he stands victorious. However, he quickly grows suspicious of how easily the battle concluded. Turning around, he recognizes ancient regenerative patterns in the serpent's remains. Confidently recalling the method to defeat such foes, he taunts the beast to attack again. The snake heeds his call, lunging at him with its jaws wide open. It traps him inside its maw, where a flickering blue flame of regeneration burns brightly. But the hero knows this trick all too well. Without hesitation, he ventures deeper into the serpent's mouth. The snake, bewildered, suddenly convulses. Its pupils burst, and it vomits out the protagonist, who makes an epic landing while wielding a fiery blue weapon, the fully formed Hellfire Great Sword. The system congratulates him for acquiring the weapon but notes that its true power remains sealed until he completes the next quest. Unfazed, he declares that even this incomplete weapon is sufficient to destroy the oversized worm. Gripping the great sword with both hands, he lowers it onto the serpent. Its blazing energy surges along the beast's body, slicing it cleanly in two from head to tail. The quest concludes as the serpent's lifeless body collapses. It's hard to answer questions when the asker isn't alive, he quips with a smirk. Now wielding the fully awakened Hellfire Great Sword, the protagonist wears a mad grin, eager for the challenges ahead. A new panel appears, announcing the next trial: 10 days of enduring scorching flames to unlock the legendary armament's true power. Flames engulf him, but the hero maintains his composure, commanding the sword to recognize him as its master. However, the timer continues to tick. Growing irritated, he demands that the Flame King within the sword come to its senses. The timer abruptly hits 0 as the sword's spirit begs for forgiveness. Calming down, the protagonist greets his old companion. The Flame King humbly declares it has awaited his return since the demons were banished to Pandemonium. Curious, the ruler asks what happened in his absence. The sword explains that Hell was invaded by heavenly beings who exploited the demons' powerlessness after their ruler's departure. These invaders sealed Hell and banished all its inhabitants. The Flame King avoided banishment only by being swallowed by the guardian serpent, where it waited patiently for its master's return. Moved by the Flame King's loyalty, the protagonist promises to reveal his purpose in due time. Changing the subject, he asks the sword about the orb of energy left by the serpent. The Flame King warns him, recalling a similar aura from the heavenly beings that once invaded Hell. Slightly unsettled, the protagonist raises his hand and absorbs the orb, confident the system wouldn't trick him with a fake reward. A new panel appears, stating that one more orb is required to access a hidden area. Back on Earth, a Soul Clan employee nervously chats with Chanho about a viral massacre video, forcing him to awkwardly hide his friend's identity. To his surprise, the director interrupts the conversation and invites Chanho for a private meeting. Bewildered, Chanho humbly asks why he's been singled out. The dashing director casually suggests they enjoy a smoke together. Now on the rooftop, sharing a cigarette, he probes Chanho about whether he was truly at the heart of the massacre. Chanho quickly discerns that the director is evaluating whether whether he can recruit the notorious awakened individual. Not wanting to betray his friend, Chanho insists there's nothing noteworthy to report. The director, appearing thoughtful, declares his determination to bring the individual into the fold, regardless of the cost. Chanho offers an uneasy smile, pretending ignorance, and redirects the topic toward the guild's ace, Cho Young. At this, the director abruptly falls silent. When Chanho gently nudges him, the man reveals that Cho Young has been driving herself worryingly hard. A week before the licensing test, Cho Young is seen undergoing her toughest simulation yet at the Soul Clan headquarters. The B-rank samurai swiftly slices her practice dummies before they even appear. However, when overwhelmed by a larger group, a dummy manages to bite her shoulder. The clan leader immediately halts the simulation. Shaken, Cho Young pleads for another chance, but as the enemies fade away, she faces the clan leader, who beckons her over to discuss her performance. Frustrated, Cho Young insists she could have done better if given more time. With measured composure, Jun Young points out that she's placing too much pressure on herself. Cho Young counters, saying he has always encouraged her to push for her goals, even through hardship. Remaining calm, Jun Young clarifies that his advice pertains specifically to physical training. Cho Young, with a hint of sarcasm, retorts that she knows her body's limits better than he does and insists she hasn't overexerted herself. Jun Young, turning slightly sarcastic in response, asks if she truly believes she understands herself better than the AI does. He instructs her to compare her mental state to a baseline. Upon seeing the erratic graph, Cho Young reluctantly admits her error. Jun Young, with clenched teeth, asks if she still hasn't noticed the abnormal mental state flagged by the AI. Looking somber, she mumbles that it's all to secure a top 5 position. Hearing this, Jun Young questions her real motivation for ranking higher. He wonders if her goal is merely to access the lucrative A-rank gates for glory and wealth. However, Cho Young, gripping her bottle tightly until it shatters, bites her lip and firmly asserts that her ambition isn't for riches or fame but to eradicate every monster in existence. 2 days later, at the Manhwa clan building, Sukwu makes his way into a highly secure area. Using his fingerprints, he unlocks a reinforced door, which creaks open to reveal a mysterious room. Repelled by the foul odor, Sukwu notices his subject is doing well. Muttering about improving ventilation and lighting, his gaze lands on a man hunched over, ravenously devouring a corpse. Jinchul, chewing on raw flesh, glares like a feral beast at Sukwu, who nonchalantly carries on. Casually, Sukwu remarks that the A-ranker should continue eating and resting to ensure the monster serum takes full effect. Eyeing the blood-covered, deranged hunter, the long-haired man grins with excitement for his pet to shine in the upcoming licensing test. Time skips forward by 2 days. The protagonist has been grinding quests to boost his strength in the Pantheon. When the Flame King asks about their departure from Hell, the absolute ruler declares the time has come. As 3 days pass in a flash, the test day arrives. At the arena, the announcer highlights how the rising number of awakened individuals intensifies the competition every year. Photographers eagerly capture the lined-up candidates, but their attention shifts to a sleek white Lamborghini. The crowd immediately recognizes its owner and flocks to greet the 2 stars of the Manhwa clan. A journalist is the first to question Sukwu, bluntly asking his thoughts on the Manhwa clan's return after being banned for cheating 2 years ago. Sukwu, silently cursing the persistent reporter, calmly states he regrets the incident from back then. Another bold journalist accuses him of deflecting blame with empty words. Unfazed, Sukwu pats the man's shoulder and confidently asserts that this time the competition will be clean and fair. The two proceed into the stadium, brushing off criticism. Annoyed by the remarks, Jinchul fumes, upset that Sukwu didn't retaliate. Sukwu calmly advises to enjoy himself but warns him to keep his emotions in check to avoid jeopardizing their position again. Nearby, a large man in white keenly observes their conversation, narrowing his eyes as he identifies the disguised figure of Soul Clan leader Jun Young. Attempting to provoke him, he comments that Jun Young resembles a gorilla in disguise. The old man, unfazed, retorts that the outfit is merely a tactic to evade paparazzi. Jun Young counters, stating he doesn't enjoy flaunting fame like certain others. Tipping his hat, the seasoned clan leader analyzes Jinchul's aura, immediately recognizing its unnaturally concealed nature. Sukwu, with a smug expression, boasts that Jun Young seems quite fixated on his candidate. The clan leader swiftly fires back, quipping that he hopes Sukwu hasn't brought another cheater like last time. As the Manhwa members walk away, Jinchul grumbles about Jun Young's unsettling gaze. Sukwu dismisses it, urging him to focus on their real target, the promising Shino Young. Jinchul, leering, comments that she'll be an easy target. Sukwu warns against underestimating her, reminding him of the rigorous training she's received. But instead of heeding the warning, Jinchul's twisted expression reflects his eagerness to crush her. Meanwhile, Jun Young continues monitoring Jinchul from afar, determined to decipher the Manhwa clan's agenda. His attention shifts abruptly to a far more more ominous presence. The protagonist arrives, emanating a terrifying aura. As he strides past, the Soul Clan leader involuntarily shivers, shaken by the dark energy radiating from him. Concerned by her leader's reaction, Cho Young inquires what's wrong. Jun Young, still unsettled, warns her to stay vigilant. Confidently, she brushes off his concern, vowing not to let the Honma clan pull any tricks. Narrowing his eyes, Jun Young clarifies that his worry lies not with the Honma clan but with the other individual who passed by her. With 30 minutes remaining, an announcement summons all candidates to the exam hall. Wrapping up his call with Chanho, the protagonist scans his fingerprints and retrieves a sleek uniform from a high-tech dispenser. The candidates gather in the exam hall. A nearby geezer, fueled by lingering resentment, recalls the hundreds of complaints that ignited his determination, vowing to punish the protagonist for his earlier affront, but his plans are thwarted when a massive figure hoists him by the skull and orders him aside. Swallowing his pride, the geezer reluctantly retreats. As he broods, the protagonist enters the scene, exuding confidence in his cutting-edge suit, ready to conquer anyone who dares to challenge him. As the exam commences, participants gather in the arena, where glowing purple rings descend from the sky. The supervisor steps forward, greeting the crowd before providing an explanation. He gestures toward the descending rings, explaining that they represent the 3 levels of the gate, a structure specifically crafted for the licensing exam. Each level, he elaborates, features a distinct environment and unique conditions for completion. Curiosity ripples through the competitors as a ghostly pale child raises his hand to ask when they will receive their weapons. The supervisor's expression hardens as he sharply responds, "No weapons will be provided, and no one is allowed to bring any equipment apart from the suits issued to you." This announcement triggers a wave of discontent, with complaints erupting that combat without weapons is impossible. At that moment, a lively AI hologram materializes, immediately capturing everyone's attention. With a cheerful and animated demeanor, the hologram introduces itself, explaining its role in monitoring and tracking everyone's progress. It then drops an unexpected revelation. The test is not designed to assess combat skills but rather to evaluate natural survival abilities in extreme conditions. The gate opens with a low rumble, and the participants are transported to the first level. The oppressive environment quickly takes its toll. Within moments, everyone is drenched in sweat and struggling to breathe. Meanwhile, a team of analysts observes the participants through a network of cameras, chuckling at their apparent lack of preparedness and speculating about the likelihood of widespread failure. One analyst, a mushroom-headed individual, smirks and compliments Choi Young, who remains calm and conserves his energy amidst the chaos. Their leader, Sukwu, grins with satisfaction at the praise his ace is receiving. Meanwhile, others commend Jinchul from the Honma clan for his impressive performance. Sukwu glances at Jinchul, expecting to detect some reaction. However, Sukwu's face remains impassive, his expression as unreadable as ever. As anxiety begins to spread among the participants, all eyes are drawn to a particular figure. A composed and enigmatic man, who had previously sent an assassin after this individual, is stunned as he recognizes him. The protagonist stands unaffected, emanating no discernible aura and showing no signs of discomfort, not even a bead of sweat. It is revealed that the protagonist secretly consumed a potion that renders him immune to environmental effects. He chuckles inwardly, knowing the potion is forbidden, but only if he gets caught. Suddenly, glowing purple bands materialize on everyone's wrists. The AI hologram reappears, announcing the start of the first round. It explains that the goal is to hunt 20 swamp orcs. With a confident smirk, the protagonist dashes off as soon as the round begins, spurring the others to scramble after him, determined not to fall behind. A desperate hunter, parched with thirst, drinks from a suspicious water fountain, only to be ensnared by a sticky worm that bursts from the ground and swallows him whole. Luckily, the suit's safety mechanisms save his life. Meanwhile, the protagonist races through the forest in search of his targets. Elsewhere in the arena, the rescue team extracting the eliminated participant receives an order to track down candidate 104. Returning to the protagonist, he finally locates a swamp orc. Holding a large boulder, he taunts the oversized creature. Tossing the boulder into the air like a toy, he punches it mid-flight, shattering it into thousands of deadly fragments that obliterate the monster. A rescue team observer, sent to monitor him, begins to understand why this candidate is under surveillance. Realizing that hunting the orcs one by one is inefficient, the protagonist reluctantly taps into his mana and summons a shadow wraith. Hours later, he reaches a cave teeming with swamp orcs. The ground quakes as the cave begins to shake, making the creatures wary. Suddenly, the ceiling bursts apart and the protagonist lands with dramatic flair. Brushing off the dirt, he appears annoyed at having to dig through the earth like a common laborer. The swamp orcs celebrate, believing their prey has delivered itself to them. Unperturbed, the protagonist casually counts them using a wand-like stick, confirming there are enough to meet his quota. With a sly grin, he orders his flame demon sword to burn them all to ashes, silencing their premature mature celebrations. Elsewhere in the rainforest, Cheyenne, a skilled hunter from the Soul Clan, uses her aura to track targets. Sensing one nearby, she darts through the trees like a bullet. Confident in her abilities, she estimates she can clear the first level within an hour. However, just as she approaches her fourth kill, another hunter swoops in and claims it. Her eyes widen in disbelief as the intruder, a hulking figure, dashes past her. Irritated, Cheyenne glares at Gile, a loud and arrogant hunter from the Hongma clan, who boasts about his fifth kill. She scornfully labels him Hongma trash, while he mocks her for assuming the kill was hers. The two exchange biting insults, their rivalry escalating. High on adrenaline and irritation, Gile considers eliminating her but decides to wait until the second level. Turning her back on him with an exaggerated sigh, Cheyenne raises her middle finger, her smug grin fueling his rage. Furious, the short-tempered Gile charges toward her, ready to strike. However, both of them suddenly freeze as their attention is drawn to a deafening roar that reverberates through the forest. Minutes before their meeting, the protagonist wields his flamed sword to smolder his foes, unleashing the Hellfire Greatsword's first skill. Suddenly, a bolt of ravaging flames bursts out of his seemingly ordinary stick, enveloping the target and creating a tornado that erupts into the sky. Shocked observers are left speechless at this incredible display. The AI announces our fiery hero's promotion to the second floor. Chaos erupts among the judges, who failed to find any information on him, while others rush to recruit him. Meanwhile, the Soul Clan leader grins, intrigued by the protagonist's monstrous power. Annoyed by the protagonist stealing the spotlight, Sukwu scoffs and walks away in disappointment. At the ranking office, the clerk lady rattles her colleague, who previously mocked her hunch about the protagonist. Meanwhile, another observer can hardly believe his eyes as he realizes that the weak, old geezer Jin Sang has been tailing the protagonist the entire time. Armed with an axe, the foolish old man begins finishing off the half-burnt corpses left behind by the protagonist, racking up 11 kills in the process. The ranking office employees discuss how such a geezer could have possibly entered the trials. The clerk lady reveals that Jin Sang had submitted a barrage of complaints to join. At that moment, the branch manager arrives and explains that he personally approved the old man's participation. The manager reveals that Jin Sang was once reported entering a gate strapped with dynamite. Dumbfounded, the clerk lady asks if the madman is trying to commit suicide. However, the manager shares Jin Sang's tragic backstory. He lost his family to a gate fracture and now lives solely for revenge. When questioned about his apparent favoritism towards the protagonist, the manager takes pride in nominating him, joking that the 3-month pay cut he endured to cover damages was worth it. As the protagonist's name is mentioned, the screen focused on our hero begins to blur. Elsewhere in the stadium, Sukwu discreetly hands a hidden message to a hitman-like figure, informing him that the control room feed is down. Confused, the man recalls they were supposed to eliminate the protagonist on the second or third floor. Sukwu clarifies that plans have changed now that the protagonist has left Gile in the dust. Wearing a creepy smile, the Hongma leader jokes that eliminating the protagonist might be too harsh. Ultimately, Sukwu orders the guard to inject mutant serum into the monsters at the second floor gate. The scout following our protagonist carries out the task. As the protagonist approaches the second floor gate, Sukwu awaits his failure with a sadistic grin. The mutant ampoules are injected into the golem guarding the gate, causing it to evolve into a mutant swamp floating golem, capable of producing fog to mislead intruders. The man hired by Sukwu watches in amusement, admiring the monstrous result. Hoping for a generous reward, he suddenly finds his item exploding, revealing it had been tainted with a paralysis agent, likely planted by Sukwu to eliminate loose ends. Paralyzed and helpless, the man watches as the swamp golem approaches, showing no intention of letting him escape. Meanwhile, the protagonist grows increasingly concerned, realizing he has been walking in circles. The map installed in his equipment malfunctions, leaving him disoriented. As he moves forward, he stumbles upon the decomposed corpse of Sukwu's hireling. Suspicion arises as the protagonist doubts the test organizers would have intentionally left a body in this spot. Suddenly, the shadow of the golem looms before him, followed by a swift surprise attack. The protagonist deflects it just in time with his flamed sword, cleverly disguised as an ordinary stick. Before he can fully react, the golem hurls a massive boulder in his direction, which detonates on impact, releasing a surge of smoke and fiery heat. To survive, the protagonist activates his absorbed flame skill, shielding himself from the scorching blast. He contemplates using the Fury skill that once defeated the orcs, but it remains on cooldown. Worse, the golem appears unwilling to wait. It unleashes a rapid sequence of attacks, which the protagonist deflects with growing frustration. Irritated by the relentless barrage, the protagonist resolves to end the battle decisively. Rushing forward, he strikes the golem's core with a powerful punch, but his efforts barely scratch its solid rock body. In retaliation, the golem sends him flying through the air with overwhelming force. The scene shifts to Jinchul, the cheater, who has just defeated his final ogre, fulfilling the conditions to ascend to the second floor. As a reward, he receives a special box containing a compass for navigation, an ampoule, and a cryptic note, tools for his continued cheating. Upon realizing the protagonist is still on the first floor, Jinchul burns the note without hesitation. Returning to the protagonist, he slams into a tree but quickly regains his footing. With a smirk, he summons his sludge-like shadow ghost, commanding it to consume the golem. Drawing his sword, he carves a path for the sinister creature, promising it a reward double what it provides. The flames shrink the shadow ghost to a mere fraction of its original size as it moves to confront the golem, setting the stage for a climactic battle. As the golem approaches, it suddenly swells back to its full form with rapid growth, extending multiple shadowy hands that grab hold of the golem's burning stones. Meanwhile, the protagonist's screen flickers back to life, though all the exam faculty can see is a dense fog. One of the employees remarks that the first floor was supposed to resemble a tropical rainforest, suggesting that something has clearly gone awry. Suddenly, the golem appears on the screen, causing the spectators to question why such a monster has been placed in the test. The branch manager's attendant notes that the creature is a mutant in every sense and asks for orders on how to proceed. However, the branch manager remains unresponsive, completely absorbed by the scene unfolding on the screen. At that moment, another employee arrives and informs him that the test examiners have surrounded the protagonist, asking whether they should forcibly intervene and stop the test. Apologizing, the manager acknowledges that the situation can no longer be helped. Just then, the clerk points out something on the screen. The golem has already been defeated. Its burning fragments are seen flying through the air, followed by a powerful explosion. At this moment, the manager finally grasps the true strength of their demon king. What he had earlier dismissed as a mere measurement error now becomes glaringly obvious. The protagonist's power is beyond their ability to grade, rendering their attempts futile. The branch manager reflects on the protagonist, now perceiving him as a monster beyond imagination, possessing unparalleled strength. Meanwhile, the clerk, who had previously been impressed by the protagonist, quietly roots for him. However, her colleague cautions that despite his power, the protagonist might be unaware of the bigger picture, as Jinchul seems poised to beat him to the second floor. An employee asks the branch manager whether he wants to withdraw the personnel deployed around the protagonist. The manager declines, instead instructing the employee to have them submit a report once they've uncovered what exactly has transpired. The scene shifts to contestant number 14, Jinchul, who is filled with rage as he darts around searching for the gate that should be close by. He notices the fog beginning to thin, indicating that the golem has been destroyed, but he remains confident that he will be the first to reach the second floor. Meanwhile, the protagonist pours his blood over the remnants of the mutant golem, preparing to use his soul prison on it. With a commanding voice, he utters the word, "Summon," leaving the spectators agape in shock. As the spectators watch in disbelief, the monster is brought back to life. The protagonist commands the creature to stop posturing and show its true form, noting that it has already delayed him long enough. The golem bows down, and the protagonist steps onto it, instructing it to run toward the gate. Upon arriving at the gate, Jinchul feels a surge of excitement, convinced he is the first to reach it. However, his thrill quickly turns to bewilderment when he hears an unusual noise echoing around him. The scene transitions to Sukwu, who enters the screen room followed by his men, commenting that he had expected the test to be over by now. As he glances at the screen and sees his pawn looking bewildered, anger washes over him, fueled by frustration at his shortcomings. The scene shifts back to the protagonist, who is calmly riding the floating golem. Using the Flame King's breath to clear a path, he skillfully creates the shortest route, which undoubtedly leads straight to the gate. He throws a punch at the golem's head, urging it to run faster. Mimicking the actions of a rider on a horse, he keeps using his flames to clear the path ahead, driving the golem forward. At the same time, employees and onlookers conclude that number 104 likely employed some kind of summoning technique. In this world, such a technique is entirely new and unheard of. One staff member suggests it might be a type of aura-based technique. The colleague standing next to the clerk remarks that this test is bound to go viral on YouTube, commending the protagonist for resembling a hero straight out of a fantasy movie. Sukwu, in frustration, slams his fist on the desk in the control room. An employee approaches calmly, suggesting that he should leave the room if he intends to keep causing a disturbance. Sukwu regains control of his anger and pretends, with a polite tone that he momentarily lost his composure due to the incredible performance of number 104. Standing beside him, the Seoul clan leader Junyoung remarks, with a hint of bluffing, that Suk-woo could never have foreseen this and confidently predicts that Cho-young will soon arrive at the gate entrance. Jinchul, equally annoyed by the protagonist, is swiftly approached from behind by Cho-young. Spotting her, he dashes toward the gate, determined not to be left behind, turning the moment into an impromptu race. Meanwhile, our hero has already arrived on the second floor with his golem puppet. Noticing that this level is engulfed in a blizzard, the complete opposite of the first, he mocks the test administrators for their lack of creativity. Dismissing the golem, he receives congratulations for being the first to reach the second floor. The guiding AI soon reveals the conditions for the next part of the test. The AI explains that the top 5 players will each begin from different entrances, and all participants will share a single goal: to reach the peak of the snow-covered mountain. The protagonist makes a rough guess that the distance is around 5 kilometers and begins his ascent. He finds it irritating to climb with his bare hands, especially knowing that cameras are positioned everywhere, preventing him from using his abilities. The scene shifts to Jinchul, irritated by his position on the mountain. The test has clearly taken a toll on his nerves, and he's consumed with frustration, fearing he might lose control of his temper unless he eliminates number 104, who reached the gate before him despite all the dirty tricks he had planned. Suddenly, Jinchul hears movement a short distance behind him. Furious, he shouts, demanding to know who it is. To his surprise, it's the same old Baldy from before. Somehow, the man has made it to the second floor just in time, though the harsh weather appears to be overwhelming him. With a villainous gleam in his eyes, Jinchul presses against the mountainside, attempting to trigger an avalanche to get rid of the unsuspecting man. The Baldy slaps his own face, trying to gather his strength as memories of his lost family flash through his mind. With a burst of defiance, he shouts that he doesn't feel the cold at all. However, his determination is short-lived as he's soon swept away by the avalanche. Jinchul, after successfully getting rid of him, gives a sinister smile. Immediately afterward, the broadcast drones malfunction, leaving the staff unable to monitor the situation. Suk-woo, who is undoubtedly behind the disruption, silently wishes his pawn good luck, hoping he won't make any mistakes or disappoint him. The scene shifts back to the second floor, where some of the regular players, though chilled by the harsh conditions, encourage each other to keep going. Suddenly, Jinchul appears behind them, moving at lightning speed. Without warning, he grabs their heads and crushes them in his hands, his strength enhanced by the Orc Champion Ampoule effect. Jinchul looks enormous and unstoppable, killing everyone in his path as he advances. Meanwhile, Cho-young is left bewildered, noticing that all the tech and electronic devices have mysteriously stopped functioning. The protagonist, on the other hand, sees this as a fortunate turn of events, realizing that he can now use his skills freely without being noticed. Leaping off the cliff, he activates his Destruction Dragon Knight Vala's armor. As his majestic demonic wings unfold, he soars through the air. Cho-young, sensing a powerful and unfamiliar aura, looks up and sees the protagonist flying above with an imposing presence. Meanwhile, Jinchul, still busy slaughtering other players, catches sight of the protagonist flying toward the peak. He speculates that the protagonist might have used a harpy ampoule to gain the ability to fly and immediately starts chasing after him. The scene shifts back to the Association building, where Junyoung is urgently requesting the branch manager to abort the test. He argues that the safety of the awakened should be their top priority, pushing for the test to be halted immediately. The president, appearing spaced out, asks Seoul Clan Captain Junyoung to be patient, reassuring him that an investigation team will be sent as soon as possible. Suk-woo, however, takes the opportunity to mock Junyoung, questioning why he would even call them awakened if they can handle such minor risks. This remark ignites Junyoung's anger. Captain Junyoung, now suspicious, directly questions Suk-woo, asking if he is responsible for the current situation. Suk-woo, ignoring the question, continues to taunt him, insinuating that Cho-young must be weak if Junyoung is so worried about her. He pushes further, calling Junyoung an old man and suggesting that he should consider retiring, deliberately stepping on his nerves. The scene then shifts back to the protagonist, who has reached the peak and is warming up, preparing himself to enter the third floor. Meanwhile, the old Baldy somehow manages to survive the avalanche. Lying in the snow as tears stream down his face, he rises to his feet and shouts out loud, declaring himself a victor for having survived. It's only fair that he revels in his success, as the first step is always the most challenging. As Cho-young enters the third floor, she learns about the conditions for clearing this level. To progress, participants must acquire 1,000 points, which can be earned by defeating the monsters that inhabit this new environment. As it is very dark, Cho-young remains cautious, taking a moment for her vision to adjust to the shadows. Suddenly, a loud noise comes from behind her. Turning around, she sees her rival, the cheater Jinchul, standing there, bulked up as if he's on steroids. Jinchul remarks that she is fortunate to have arrived before him, but Cho Young dismisses his comments, telling him not to be so noisy. Her primary concern is not Jinchul but the protagonist, who has outpaced everyone on both the first and second floors. Even her captain has acknowledged his formidable strength. Cho Young receives an alert indicating an aura reactor error, but before she can react, Jinchul cowardly attacks her from behind, leaving her injured. Jinchul smugly claims that he had originally intended to deal with the protagonist first but has now altered his plans to target her instead. Meanwhile, the protagonist is focused on grinding points to clear the stage. He activates his fire cannon special skill, annihilating the targets in front of him with ease. He comments to the Fire King that it has grown rusty if it takes this long to defeat such minor opponents. Glancing at his points, he notices they are stuck at 530 and wonders what is happening. He resolves to eliminate all the remaining targets before figuring out the issue. The scene shifts to the branch manager, who is increasingly worried because the network has still not returned. As the atmosphere fills with anxiety, the biggest cheater of all, Sukwu, remains relaxed. He has fused the ampoule he gave to his pawn with a hedgehog, allowing him to monitor her pulse. Sukwu glances at the anxious Junyoung and informs him that his trainee would likely be half-blind or in pretty bad shape if she were to make it back alive. The scene shifts to Choyoung, who is badly wounded. She asks Jinchul about his objective. In a disturbingly inhumane manner, Jinchul licks the girl's blood and taunts her, asking if she isn't going to use her shield aura. Choyoung decides to fight back, launching a kick at Jinchul. However, her kick misses, and she quickly retreats into hiding. This move irritates Jinchul, who mocks her for being a coward. Desperate, she tries to heal herself but is spotted by Jinchul. In a swift motion, she throws her defensive suit at his face, then follows up with a strike to his groin and an knee slammed into his face. Declaring herself the ace of the Soul Clan, she channels all her strength into her attack, slamming Jinchul to the ground. With that, she moves away, determined to find and hunt the monsters. Meanwhile, the protagonist grows increasingly frustrated with the device he is wearing, finding it useless as it records no points. He wonders whether he should go and ask the organizers about the malfunctioning equipment, realizing that all their devices seem rusty and unreliable. As Choyoung navigates the area, she finds herself alone, puzzled about where everyone has gone. Suddenly, Jinchul approaches from behind, seeking revenge. Alarmed, she turns to run for her life, but Jinchul appears in front of her as if he had blinked. Slamming her down to the ground, he continues to attack her relentlessly, behaving like a nasty goblin and causing her to bleed. Grabbing her by the hair, he holds her head and taunts her, stating that she will face a painful death. Tears stream down Choyoung's face as she bleeds and receives a punch to her abdomen. Jinchul taunts her, asking her to call for help, only to mock her by reminding her that all the equipment is broken. Seizing an opening, Choyoung thrusts her finger into Jinchul's eyes, causing him to bleed and howl in pain. She tries to stand up to escape, but Jinchul grabs her by the neck, lifting her off the ground. Just as he prepares to throttle her to death, the protagonist appears from behind, confronting him and demanding to know what he thinks he is doing. Upon seeing the protagonist, Jinchul immediately releases Choyoung and bursts into mad laughter, viewing the protagonist as the prey that has walked right into his trap. He taunts the protagonist, saying he has been looking all over for him. The protagonist calmly thanks Jinchul for waiting and deliberately dodges his attack as he approaches Choyoung. Noticing her poor condition, he wonders if she has a significant wound, given her slow recovery. Turning to face Jinchul, the protagonist questions him, asking if he is the one behind her injuries. With a smirk on his face, Jinchul replies that he merely taught her a lesson and soon plans to make the protagonist look just like her. The protagonist reiterates his question, clarifying that he is referring to the broken point meter. Jinchul laughs mockingly and launches a wave attack toward the protagonist, claiming he is out of luck since the emergency protection system is broken. Instantly, the protagonist dashes toward him and delivers a powerful punch to his face, sending him flying. Following up with a fire barrage attack, the protagonist adds insult to injury. Despite this, the cheater still refuses to acknowledge his situation, believing he can easily take down the protagonist. However, his confidence wavers when he suddenly notices a group of tame spirits standing behind the protagonist, filling him with fear. The scene shifts to the Hunters Association building, where a clerk approaches the branch manager, informing him that the network on the second floor has been restored. However, she mentions that it will still take another 30 minutes for the network on the third floor to be restored. The branch manager instructs her to deploy the security crew from the second floor to guard the door of the third floor. The atmosphere grows tense between the leaders of the two major guilds. Suddenly, a staff member approaches the branch manager with alarming news. The security team has reported one confirmed death and numerous casualties on the second floor. This revelation shocks the branch manager, who never anticipated such an outcome, making him realize he should have called off the test. Meanwhile, Chanho, reviewing a news update, learns about the video transmission failure at a test site that hasn't been restored for over an hour. Realizing it's the same place his friend has gone to, he quickly grabs his coat and prepares to visit the location. The scene shifts back to Jinchul, cheater number 14, who is now running for his life after realizing his prey has turned into a predator. Suddenly, one of his legs is slashed off, causing him to fall to the ground in a supine position. Jinchul quickly uses a regeneration ampoule to regrow his leg, now left with just one more. The protagonist mocks him, comparing him to the bugs in hell that regenerate in such a grotesque manner. As Jinchul's leg regenerates, the network on the third floor is restored, allowing everyone to see the live recording of the protagonist confronting Jinchul on screen. Sukwu grows worried as he watches his pawn on his knees, begging for his life and declaring that he has already used up all his ampoules and cannot regenerate anymore. Completely unfazed, the protagonist retorts that he will try splitting Jinchul in two to see if he can multiply like bacteria. As the creep is pulverized, he begs even more desperately for mercy. Noticing a spark of light, the protagonist realizes it's a camera and that the connection has been restored. Diverting his attention back to Jinchul, the protagonist presents him with a proposition. He offers Jinchul a chance to be set free alive if he can correctly answer 3 questions. Desperate to save his life, Jinchul eagerly asks if the protagonist is telling the truth. Using his sword disguised as a stick, the protagonist forces Jinchul to bow before him and delivers a chilling death stare, declaring that if he finds him lying, he will split him in two. With that, the protagonist begins the questionnaire. The first question he poses is whether Jinchul is the one responsible for everything that has happened at the test site. The tense atmosphere thickens, creating an air of anxiety, especially for Sukwu, the cheater captain. Annoyed by the sudden silence of the loudmouth, the protagonist warns Jinchul to respond quickly if he does not want to be bisected. In response, Jinchul begins bawling and admits to orchestrating everything, like a crybaby. The protagonist finds the emotional confession intriguing. Without wasting a moment, the protagonist asks his second question: who is the mastermind behind everything? Pressured to reveal the truth, Jinchul immediately throws his clan leader under the bus, naming the Honma clan. The revelation surprises the protagonist but fuels rumors in the control room. Suspicions confirmed, everyone in the control room turns to look at Sukwu. Hearing the accusations, Sukwu boils with rage at his pawn's betrayal. Out of options, he lashes out at the management. However, the branch manager remains unfazed and orders Sukwu to prepare an explanation for the police. Realizing he is cornered, Sukwu agrees to attend his hearing at the Hunter's Bureau. Silently, he lowers his head to avoid attracting more attention. Moments later, outside the stadium, Sukwu leaves along with his guards. One of them wonders why the clan leader lowers his head like a peasant. Sukwu calmly explains that it is the smartest choice to avoid the sole clan leader's fury, which is rightly so. As Jun Young in the control room boils with anger, the manager expresses gratitude to the graceful leader for his patience. But Jun Young retorts that he doesn't care about the association. While the branch manager orders his team to implement maximum security measures, the protagonist poses his third question to the pathetic A-ranker kneeling before him. Does Jinchul possess any points? Reluctantly, the crybaby answers honestly, still shaken by the threat of being sliced in half. With that, the AI announces the protagonist's victory and the conclusion of the 3-phase exam. However, the protagonist is not satisfied with the sudden win. As Jinchul, the bootlicker, looks up thinking he is safe, his smile warps as the two halves of his body separate. Living up to his title, the ruler of hell declares it a punishment for failing to answer in time. Before leaving, the protagonist's gaze shifts to Cho Young, still curled up on the floor, surrounded by a healing aura. Moments later, the security team arrives and begins evacuating the injured, including Cho Young. Observing the chaos from his office, the association's president shuts his laptop while reading the anti-Honma comments. His secretary informs him that all 10 clans are gathering to meet up. The old man wonders if the protagonist is the first monster in a while since Korea's famous number 1. Lee Chang-shik. When the secretary confirms the protagonist's instant promotion, the president orders her to recruit him at all costs. As the results are revealed, rumors spread about the Honma clan's downfall. However, they are interrupted by the cute AI's announcement. It explains that, due to the unusual circumstances, the ranking criteria will be based on the order of passing the first level. Consequently, the protagonist receives an A rank for securing first place. Having seen the results, Chan Ho immediately calls the protagonist and asks where he is. The protagonist answers that he's chilling in the S-rank hunter's restroom, leaving Chan-ho speechless. Chilling in a massage chair, our boy's relaxation is interrupted by his best friend, Chan-ho, who looks deeply confused. Casually, the protagonist mentions that the president's secretary told him to chill in the S-rank room. Amazed, Chan-ho realizes that the protagonist was personally invited by the big boss as the man of the hour. While sipping his boba, the protagonist reveals that he might even be promoted to S-rank. Astonished, Chan-ho wonders about the insane amount of cash he could make. He updates the protagonist about the commotion outside due to this news. Meanwhile, as journalists and recruiters gather, one of the participants steps out of an elevator. Everyone's eyes gravitate toward him, and they rush over to snag the first interview. Enjoying the spotlight, the famous geezer celebrates his big win in the licensing exam. Porters shout for his attention and ask him to share his name. With a straight face, the geezer introduces himself as Han, the protagonist. At that moment, the crowd goes wild. However, as the crowd nearly stomps the geezer, some begin to realize that the protagonist isn't supposed to be a hairless old man. As the results announcement concludes, the old man's borderline rank is revealed. Meanwhile, the rescued hunters escape, cursing Jinchul for his disgusting antics. However, the insider from the Honma clan behind them panics due to the lack of news about Jinchul's body. Reluctantly, he approves the decision to close the gate. At home, the protagonist's mother watches the sensational news. The anchor shares that despite a terrible accident during the toughest licensing exam of all time, one applicant shattered all records. Suddenly, a picture of the protagonist appears on the TV, congratulating him on earning an A rank and speculating about his promotion to S rank. Shocked, his mother frantically calls for Jisoo. Worried about her mother, Jisoo rushes in, shaken, and looks at the TV. Both mother and daughter are flabbergasted when the man of the hour enters the house and casually greets the frozen women. Meanwhile, at the Honma clan building, inspectors from the association give an ultimatum to the leader, stating that they are forbidden from hunting again. The two inspectors advise Sukwu to come with them obediently. However, flaunting his rank as the sixth strongest hunter, Sukwu declares it ridiculous to oust him on trivial charges. With a fake smile, the clan leader feels furious about how his little experiment is leading to his downfall. Manager Kim from the bureau delivers another warning. In response, the clan leader stands up and stresses that he shouldn't be detained just because of his association with Jinchul. Tired of the argument, the manager warns Sukwu one last time and prepares to use force. Sukwu, unfazed, tells the manager to remember how he became the leader. This statement makes the cool-headed Kim sweat as he recalls that the long-haired creep killed the previous leader in a raid to take his place. With that, Sukwu unleashes his puppeteering skill. The manager instructs his partner to get ready to fight, causing the spiky-haired inspector to grow scared. The manager urges him to man up if he doesn't want to die and charges at Sukwu. However, before Kim can react, he is stabbed in the back by Jang Woo, his own partner. Appalled by the betrayal, Kim shouts at him, but the spiky-haired inspector insists he didn't move his body. By the time Kim realizes it is Sukwu's skill at play, the long-haired creep uses his final move, finishing off Kim with his own partner's hands. As the traumatized inspector trembles, Sukwu casually leaves his office as if nothing happened, deciding to warn the association's president next. The scene shifts to Choyoung, resting in a treatment capsule. Looking over her, the clan leader receives news that due to permanent damage to her aura, she will be unable to work. Rage boils inside him as Jung-young declares his vengeance on Sukwu. Meanwhile, at home, the protagonist's mom expresses her reluctance to let him take on such a dangerous job. His sister agrees, mentioning that while she's glad to see him becoming famous, the job remains dangerous. Hearing this, the protagonist recalls Chan-ho telling him that the majority of hunters go against their families or get kicked out of their homes. Nearly on the verge of tears, his mom states she would break if he is hurt again. In response, he drops a bombshell. He has already signed up with Chan-ho's clan. Reaching into his inventory, the protagonist pulls out a bag filled with stacks of cash, leaving his mother shocked. Bragging about the down payment he received to pay off their debt, the protagonist places the unbelievable sum of money on the table. Both mother and daughter are dazed. The protagonist tells his sister not to be so shocked, encouraging her to listen to their mother and enjoy school life. Assuring them that he will take care of the expenses, he proudly announces he'll be their protector. The two begin to cry, prompting him to tease them about their awkward reaction. Jisoo jokes that she is against him hunting, but the money has changed her mind. Enjoying the wholesome scene, the protagonist considers going through hell worth every second. The scene shifts to Inspector Jang Woo recalling how Manager Kim saved him when he was an innocent recruit. The manager's heartfelt words and fatherly smile from that night circle in his mind. Returning to reality, Jang Woo trembles as he stands over the manager's cold, lifeless body. Seeing him weep his soul out, the branch manager expresses shock at Sukwu going so far. far. Jiang Wu, fueled by rage, tells them not to touch Suk-woo and swears to avenge manager Kim with his own hands. Watching this heart-wrenching scene, the president of the association commands the branch manager to take all available resources and destroy the Hongma clan along with Lee Yoka. Meanwhile, our half-asleep protagonist is woken up by a barrage of notifications. Checking his phone, he notices a text from Chanho telling him to call when he wakes up. Going out for a stroll, the protagonist contacts Chanho, who shares the good news that he has secured a C-rank gate. The protagonist jokes that he simply has to come by and sweep up the easy money. The scene shifts to the Hongma clan building, where lines of cars park outside the skyscraper as numerous men in black uniforms gather under the leadership of A-rank hunter Jin Ke-hong. Jiang Wu prepares to raid the building. The cavalry is ordered to subdue anyone who resists, going as far as murder if needed. As soon as Ke-hong gives the green light, the agents raid the building from all directions. However, when he and Jiang Wu enter, they are shocked to see gravely injured Hongma members everywhere. Undeterred, Captain Ke-hong orders the main force to retreat while the rest follow him, leading up to Suk-woo's office. There, a heavily worn-out Jun-young sits alone. Confused, Jiang Wu rushes through the hordes of unconscious bodies towards Suk-woo's office, dagger in hand. He shouts for the Hongma clan leader to reveal himself. To his dismay, the villain lies battered and bloodied on the floor. Beside him, other forces follow, equally puzzled. Before the captain can ask the Seoul clan leader what happened, a crazed Jiang Wu steals his attention. He immediately confirms Suk-woo's death and urges the revenge-fueled inspector to calm down. Captain K expresses concern that, even in vengeance, leader Jun-young may have gone too far. However, the somber man clarifies that he only took out those outside. Then, he shocks K by revealing that he found Suk-woo dead before his arrival. News quickly spreads that the Hongma clan leader was found dead, with the suspect theorized to be Seoul clan leader Han Jun-young. Meanwhile, the bald geezer is flustered about not getting any work despite creating a porter clan using his one shot at fame. Worried about starving before he secures any contracts, a well-timed call restores his hope. In Chanho's car, the protagonist confirms that he has denied all other clan offers. Chanho brags about the crazy gear the Seoul clan has, but our protagonist isn't concerned, thinking about his amazing gear from hell. Then, a thought occurs to him, and he asks how much money a C-rank gate makes. Chanho starts ranting, explaining that it costs 50 billion won to buy one, out of which 40% goes to taxes and fees. This baffles the protagonist, who curses the greedy system. Chanho summarizes that rather than clearing a gate, profits from ether cores are where the real money lies. He then asks his friend if he's sure about going alone, which surprises the protagonist. Our protagonist insists that Chanho is coming with him. Suddenly sweating buckets, Chanho reveals that he asked his sister to handle the paperwork, and she registered him as the porter. Chanho's eyes widen as he wonders if his friend is trying to kill him. At last, the two arrive at the giant red C-rank gate, receiving a salute from the guard. Chanho hands over the entry form, noting that only 2 hunters will be entering. The guard expresses his concern and confirms if they truly intend to clear a team gate as a pair since the usual minimum is 100 hunters. Seizing this opportunity, Chanho tries to persuade him not to open the gate just because a crazy A-rank hunter is involved. He adds his wish not to die single, but the guard opens the gate to avoid trouble with the psycho hunter. One last time, Chanho tries to reason with his friend, saying it's unreasonable for even an S-ranker to solo a team gate. However, our protagonist grabs him by the neck and drags him inside. Meanwhile, at the Hunter Association, footage of Suk-woo's last moments is played. It shows someone making the proud man kneel, telekinetically wrangling his limbs in different directions. Then, out of a mysterious portal, an arm pops out and rips Suk-woo's heart from his body. Analyzing the video, the president asks the branch manager and Captain K if they can uncover anything. K explains that footage from one camera is insufficient, and the branch manager adds that no traces of aura were found either. Dumbfounded, the president wonders if they have a ghost killer on their hands. Outside the red portal, the bald geezer, having changed his name, arrives as a porter. The guard, suspicious, asks why he is late. With blazing confidence, Baldy asks if the protagonist is inside. When the guard confirms, the bald geezer celebrates the once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to eat up all the protagonist's scraps as the sole porter. The scene shifts to the past, right after Jinchul was split in half. Regenerating from the fatal injury, he cries over the disgrace he faced and vows revenge. Suddenly, the same entity that killed Suk-woo appears, laughing ominously. The eyeball offers to take revenge on Jinchul's behalf. As our protagonist and Chanho enter the dungeon, Chanho grows increasingly nervous. Glancing around, it is his first time stepping inside a gate. The protagonist points out a stampede of monsters approaching, sending Chanho into a panic as he notes their enormous size. The approaching monsters are Class 3 wasteland lizards. Drawing his sword, excitement bubbles within the protagonist at the sight of so many monsters gathered together. He tells his friend to take a good look and leaps into the sky. Upon landing among the monsters, he activates his third hidden skill, Hellfire Volcano, igniting everything around him and turning the monsters to smithereens. From a distance, Chanho watches in awe, impressed and wondering if this is truly the same childhood friend he knows. As the protagonist approaches, Chanho scolds him for concealing his strength all this time. With a smile, the protagonist replies that he has now revealed it. Filled with excitement, Chanho declares that he has decided to create a new clan, one that would be the strongest not just in South Korea but in the entire world. Outside the gate, the guards notice something bizarre. Mistaking it for a gate fracture, they panic and begin giving directions to contact the Signal Corps headquarters. However, before they can leave, the bald geezer points out that someone is emerging from the gate. To their surprise, it is none other than the protagonist and Chanho. Proudly, Chanho informs the guard that they can handle the byproducts as they have successfully cleared the gate. This leaves the guard confused, as he has never seen anyone clear a gate this quickly. The bald geezer immediately rushes toward the protagonist, handing him his card. He introduces himself with a fake name, Han Dong, and shares his details, reminding the protagonist that they participated in the test together. Noticing that they share the same name, the protagonist finds the old man suspicious. Chanho then asks the geezer why he is alone if he works in a porter clan. The old man takes back his card and replies that he created the clan himself and believes the process will be quick. Chanho presses further, asking if his name is really Dong. The old man gives a thumbs up, saying he is willing to change his name in the future to avoid any nuisance for both of them. Feeling mad and frustrated, the protagonist storms off. The scene transitions to a real estate broker showing an apartment to the protagonist and his family. The protagonist's sister appears excited about the place, particularly loving that each room has an attached bathroom. Like a typical mother, the protagonist's mom cuts to the chase, asking about the price of the apartment. The agent informs her that the house is worth 18 billion won in actual transactions. Seeing his mom astonished, the agent explains that the high demand is due to the nearby Hunter Association. He emphasizes that safety is paramount, justifying the steep price. The agent then asks if her son is a successful hunter. Before she can respond, the protagonist's sister intervenes, bragging that her brother is an A-rank adventurer and on the verge of becoming an S-ranker. She adds that this news has created quite an uproar in the media. The agent responds that this explains why the protagonist seems so familiar to him. Meanwhile, the protagonist finishes analyzing the house and accepts it as his domain. He inquires about the payment procedure and asks if he can get a discount for paying the full amount up front. The dealer explains that he can offer preferential contracts if the protagonist is indeed an A-ranked adventurer. He adds that during the representative meeting of apartment residents, a fund of 2 billion won is collected for hunter attraction. If someone is an S-ranker, they can receive a deposit of 10 billion won. The ladies are petrified upon hearing such a huge amount, while the protagonist feels excited at the thought of acquiring the house for just 8 billion won and possibly saving up to 10 billion won if he becomes an S-ranker. The scene shifts to a woman walking alone on a pitch-black road. She feels an unsettling sensation, as if someone is following her. Suddenly, she trips, but someone catches her just before she falls. Feeling scared, she asks who the man is. With a creepy smile, the man steps closer, revealing his disgusting face. He tells her that she has been chosen. The next day, the woman is found dead. Her body is taken to the autopsy suite in the National Police Agency building. The autopsy officer reports that the woman died in the same manner as Sukwu, making her the 10th victim in this city alone. Captain K harbors suspicions, believing that such a murder definitely involves awakeners. Just as he thought the situation had calmed down, he now faces the challenge of a new serial killer case. Inspector Zhang Wu assures K not to worry and promises to handle the matter. However, Captain K instructs him to prioritize the gate search work at the head office first. As he leaves, Captain K asks the forensic medicine expert to make the investigation public and promises active support for the inspection bureau. If you're excited for the next part, leave a comment, and I'll do my best to bring it to you as soon as possible.